The discovery hit me like a freight train, shattering the silence of the afternoon. As I sifted through the pile of neglected mail, my fingers trembled upon an envelope with the bold print, "Termination Notice." It was addressed to Nathan. My heart raced, confusion clouding my thoughts. Why would Nathan be terminated? The apartment felt colder, the air heavier, as if bracing for a storm. I dialed Nathan's number, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "Julia, what's up? Calling in the middle of the day?" His voice, usually warm, now seemed distant, guarded. "Nathan, I found something odd in the mail. It's a termination notice." "What happened?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but panic laced my words. "I'm on a business trip in Seattle, Julia. Can't talk now. I'm in a me later." The line went dead before I could protest. A business trip? The lie was blatant, almost insulting. Nathan hadn't mentioned any trips. My mind raced, piecing together his recent late nights and evasive answers. Something wasn't right. Needing clarity, I called my former boss, Linda. Her surprise at hearing my voice did little to ease my anxiety. "Julia Wells? This is unexpected. How can I help?" Linda's voice was warm but carried an undercurrent of confusion. "It's about Nathan. I found a termination notice, and he's saying he's on a business trip. I'm just trying to understand what's happening." My voice cracked, betraying my attempt at composure. There was a pause, heavy and loaded, before Linda responded. "Julia, you didn't know? Nathan was let go over a month ago. There was an incident. He leaked confidential information to a competitor." The room spun, and I struggled to breathe. Betrayal, sharp and bitter, coursed through me. "Leaked information? But why?" Linda sighed. "It's a mess, Julia. There were rumors about him and Eve, the new secretary. Both disappeared after the incident. It's believed she was involved with someone from the competitor's side. A setup, possibly." "Eve?" The name stung, a missing piece to a puzzle I hadn't realized I was assembling. Memories flashed, Nathan's late returns, his phone buzzing with messages he'd quickly hide. It all made sense now, a narrative of deceit I had been too blind to see. I need to think about this. Thank you, Linda." My voice was a whisper drowned out by the roaring in my ears. The call ended, leaving me adrift in a sea of betrayal. My marriage, built on love and trust, now lay in ruins, the foundation eroded by lies and infidelity. Nathan's voice echoed in my mind, a mocking reminder of the facade he had maintained. Anger bubbled within me, a fierce, burning need for retribution. Nathan and Eve, their deceit had not only shattered my trust, but jeopardized my future. They would not get away with this. I would make sure of it. As I stood in the silent apartment, a plan began to form. I would confront Nathan, demand answers, and then I would make them pay. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, and I intended to serve it frozen. With newfound resolve, I packed a bag. It was time to return to my family, to the home where love and honesty still held meaning. There I would heal, and there I would plot my next move. Nathan and Eve had awakened a fury within me, one that would not rest until justice was served. The drive back to my parents' house was a blur, the landscape passing by unnoticed. My thoughts were consumed by visions of confrontation and vindication. The once cherished memories of Nathan and me now soured, replaced by the bitter taste of betrayal. As the familiar outline of my parents' home came into view, a sense of determination settled over me. Nathan and Eve's deceit had marked the end of one chapter in my life, but it was also the beginning of another. One where I would reclaim my dignity and emerge stronger, no longer a victim of their treachery. The stage was set, the players aligned. It was time for the shadows of deceit to give way to the light of retribution. Returning to my family's home felt like stepping into a different world, one where the shadows of Nathan's betrayal couldn't reach. The warmth of the hearth and the familiar scent of wood shavings offered a balm to my bruised heart. Yet as I settled into the rhythm of my childhood home, the contrast between my past and present couldn't have been starker. My father, ever the stoic craftsman, noticed my turmoil. "Julia, you're home early. Is everything all right?" His voice, roughened by years of work, carried a note of concern. I forced a smile, the weight of my secret heavy on my shoulders. "Just needed a break from the city, Dad. It's nice to be back." He nodded, sensing the unspoken words between us. "Well, you're always welcome here. This home is your sanctuary." The dinner table was a tableau of familial warmth, a stark contrast to the cold lies Nathan had served. My mother's keen eyes watched me, her intuition sharp. "Julia, you've been quiet tonight. Is there something on your mind?" The floodgates opened. Under the soft glow of the dining room light, I spilled the bitter truth of Nathan's deceit, his affair with Eve, and the termination notice that had shattered my world. My brother Alex clenched his fists, the muscles in his jaw working. "That coward! To think he'd betray you like this, and with a secretary no less. He'll regret this, Julia. I'll make sure of it." "No, Alex," I interjected, my voice firm despite the turmoil within. "This is my battle. I'll handle Nathan and Eve. They'll pay for what they've done." The resolve in my family's eyes fortified my own. This betrayal would not define me. Nathan and Eve's deception would be met with a reckoning, one crafted with the precision and care my family poured into their work. In the days that followed, my sanctuary became a fortress of planning. The serene backdrop of the woods and the workshop's steady rhythm fueled my resolve. I began documenting everything, collecting evidence of Nathan's betrayal and his professional misconduct. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin I was building for Nathan's deceit. One afternoon, as I sat in the workshop, surrounded by the comforting scent of cedar and maple, my phone rang. It was Nathan, his voice oozing false concern. "Julia, darling, why haven't you been answering my calls? I've been worried about you." The term of endearment, once sweet, now tasted like poison. "Worried? That's rich, Nathan. Or should I be asking Eve how concerned you really are?" There was a pause, a moment of silence where the facade cracked. "Julia, it's not what you think. Eve is just a colleague. Nothing more." I laughed, a sound sharp and cold. "Save your lies, Nathan. I know about the termination notice, the affair, everything. You're nothing but a coward who hides behind lies and deceit." Nathan's voice hardened, the mask slipping further. "You're overreacting, Julia. We can talk about this. Fix it." "Fix it?" My voice rose, fueled by anger and betrayal. "There's nothing left to fix. You've made your choice, and now you'll live with the consequences." I hung up, cutting off any retort he might have had. The finality of the act was liberating, a declaration of war against the man who had vowed to love and protect me. As the days turned into weeks, my resolve only strengthened. With my family's support, I began to rebuild, finding solace in the beauty of nature and the legacy of craftsmanship that had defined my lineage. My heart, though bruised, began to mend, fortified by the knowledge that retribution was within reach. Nathan and Eve's day of reckoning was coming. The echoes of their deceit would be drowned out by the whispers of retribution, a melody I intended to compose with meticulous care. The stage was set, and I was ready to take my stand. The next phase of my plan unfolded with a cold, deliberate precision. Armed with evidence of Nathan's duplicity and his affair with Eve, I sought legal counsel, ready to sever the ties that bound us in matrimony and deceit. My lawyer, a woman of sharp intellect and unwavering resolve, listened intently as I laid bare the extent of Nathan's betrayal. "As far as cases go, Julia, this one is as clear-cut as they come. We'll file for divorce on the grounds of infidelity and emotional distress. And rest assured, we'll make sure Nathan and his accomplice face the consequences of their actions," she assured me, her voice laced with a promise of retribution. Fueled by a mix of vindication and sorrow, I returned home, where my family awaited, their support unwavering. It was during these moments, surrounded by the comforting embrace of my family, that my resolve hardened. Nathan and Eve's deception would not go unpunished. The confrontation I had longed for came sooner than expected. Nathan, in a rare moment of courage or perhaps folly, arrived at my parents' doorstep, his expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Julia, we need to talk. I can explain everything," he began, stepping into the living room where my family and I stood united. "Explain? Explain how you lied, cheated, and risked our future for a fling?" My voice was calm, but beneath the surface, a storm raged. "It wasn't just a fling, Julia. Eve, she understands me in ways you never did," Nathan countered, his words slicing through the air like a knife. The room fell silent, the audacity of his admission hanging heavily between us. My brother Alex stepped forward, his anger barely contained. "You're pathetic, Nathan, to come here into our home and insult my sister with your vile excuses." "Enough," I interjected, my gaze locked on Nathan. "Your words mean nothing to me now. You've made your choice, and I've made mine. We're done, Nathan. I want a divorce. and I'll make sure everyone knows the kind of man you truly are." Nathan's facade crumbled, revealing a glimpse of the cowardice I had come to despise. "Julia, please, let's not make this messier than it needs to be. Think about what you're doing." "I have thought about it, Nathan. Every single day and night since I discovered your betrayal, you're the one who hasn't thought about the consequences of your actions. But you will. Oh, you will," I promised, my words icy. With that, Nathan left, his departure as unremarkable as his presence had become in my life. The door closing behind him felt symbolic, the final chapter of our shared life ending with a soft yet resounding click. In the days that followed, the legal proceedings began. Every step, from filing the divorce papers to serving Nathan with the notice, felt like shedding the weight of a life built on lies. The evidence of his infidelity and the repercussions of his professional misconduct painted a damning picture, one that left little room for sympathy. The community, once oblivious to Nathan's true nature, began to see him for what he was. His reputation, both personal and professional, unraveled, a fitting retribution for the pain he had caused. Eve, too, found herself ostracized, her role in Nathan's life, and their collective betrayal exposed for all to see. As the legal battle waged on, I found strength in my family's unwavering support and the work that grounded me. The workshop, with its chorus of hammers and saws, became my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the beauty of creation and the simplicity of honest labor. Nathan and Eve's downfall was a slow, inevitable spiral, their actions catching up to them in a cascade of legal and social repercussions. The satisfaction of seeing justice served was bittersweet, a reminder of the cost of their betrayal. Yet amidst the chaos, I found peace. The veil of deceit had been lifted, revealing a path forward, one where I could rebuild my life on my terms, surrounded by the love and integrity of my family. The chapter of Nathan and Eve was closing, but mine was just beginning, a narrative of resilience, redemption, and ultimately renewal. In the weeks that followed Nathan's departure and the initiation of our legal battles, I immersed myself in the work and traditions of my family's craft. The workshop, with its timeless rhythm and the scent of fresh wood, became my solace and my strength. It was here, amid the shavings and the sculptures, that a plan began to take shape. A plan not just for revenge, but for reclaiming my life and legacy. My parents, sensing a change within me, offered their silent support, their love a constant amidst the turmoil. It was during one of our evening gatherings, the golden light of sunset filtering through the windows, that my father spoke up, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. "Julia, your mother and I have been talking. We know you're going through a lot, but we also see the strength in you. The workshop. It's always been a part of who we are, and we think it's time it became a part of your future, too." His words, simple yet profound, struck a chord within me. The workshop wasn't just a place of business. It was a legacy, a testament to the values and skills passed down through generations. And now it was offering me a path forward, a way to rebuild and to make Nathan and Eve's betrayal a distant memory. As I pondered my father's words, my brother Alex brought news that added fuel to my resolve. I heard from a friend in town, Nathan and Eve. They're trying to spin the story, make it seem like you were the one at fault. Anger flared within me, hot and fierce. They're trying to tarnish my name? After everything they've done? Alex nodded, his own anger mirroring mine. But they're not finding it easy. Seems your story, the truth, is already out there. People are siding with you, Julia. Nathan and Eve, they're the ones being shunned. The news was a balm to my wounded heart. The community's support was unexpected but deeply appreciated. It reinforced my determination to not only clear my name, but to ensure Nathan and Eve faced the full consequences of their actions. With renewed purpose, I threw myself into the workshop, learning the intricacies of our craft from my father and the other artisans. Each piece I worked on, each design I sketched, felt like a step away from my past and toward a new beginning. And as I worked, I planned. The evidence I had gathered against Nathan and Eve was damning, but I wanted more than just legal victory. I wanted to expose them for who they truly were, to show the world their deceit and their cowardice. My opportunity came sooner than expected. A local community event, a showcase of artisans and craftsmen from our area, was approaching. It was the perfect platform to not only promote our family's work, but to publicly reclaim my story. "I'm going to present at the event," I announced to my family one evening, a sense of purpose infusing my words. "It's time I stepped out of the shadows Nathan and Eve tried to cast over me." My family's approval was unanimous, their pride in my resilience a tangible thing. Preparations for the event began in earnest, with each of us contributing to the collection of pieces we would display. But my contribution would be more than just crafts. It would be my declaration of independence from Nathan's betrayal, a showcase of strength forged in the fires of adversity. The day of the event arrived, a buzz of excitement filling the air as the community gathered to celebrate local talent. My heart pounded with a mix of nerves and anticipation as I took my place behind our display, the woodwork gleaming under the soft lights. As I spoke to the attendees, explaining the history and the heart behind each piece, I felt a sense of empowerment. Nathan and Eve's attempt to undermine me had failed. Here, among my peers and my community, I stood tall, my reputation untarnished. And then, amidst the crowd, I saw them. Nathan and Eve, their expressions a mix of surprise and unease as they realized the support surrounding me. The moment our eyes met, I knew. The battle may have been long and painful, but the victory was mine. Their deceit had been exposed, their reputations irrevocably damaged by their own actions. The event was a triumph, not just for our family's business, but for me personally. I had faced the worst kind of betrayal and emerged stronger, my spirit unbroken. Nathan and Eve's shadows no longer loomed over me. I had stepped into the light, my future bright with promise and possibility. As the community rallied around me, offering congratulations and support, I realized that this was just the beginning. My journey from the depths of despair to the heights of redemption was a testament to the power of resilience and the unbreakable bonds of family. Nathan and Eve had sought to destroy me, but in their malice, they had only forged a stronger, more determined Julia Wells. And as I looked toward the future, I knew there was nothing I couldn't overcome. In the aftermath of the community event, the winds of change began to blow through my life with a newfound intensity. The support of the community had not only bolstered my spirits, but had also painted a target on Nathan and Eve's backs. Their attempts to navigate the social circles they once dominated were met with cold shoulders and disdainful whispers. My story, rooted in truth and resilience, had reshaped the narrative, casting them in the stark light of reality. As the divorce proceedings advanced, I was summoned to a mediation session, a final attempt to resolve matters without further court intervention. The prospect of facing Nathan and Eve, not just as the wronged party, but as an empowered woman reclaiming her narrative, filled me with a sense of grim satisfaction. The mediation room was sterile, the air thick with tension. Nathan sat across from me, his usual arrogance replaced by a sullen resignation. Eve was not present, a fact that spoke volumes about the fractures in their facade. "Nathan, we're here to finalize the terms of the divorce. It's clear that the marriage cannot be salvaged," the mediator began, her voice neutral yet firm. Nathan's gaze met mine, a flicker of something. Regret, perhaps, or merely the realization of his impending downfall, crossed his face. "Julia, I know I messed up. I never meant for things to go this far," he stammered, his voice lacking its usual confidence. The words meant to elicit sympathy only fueled my resolve. "Messed up? You betrayed our vows, Nathan. This goes beyond a simple mistake. You made your choices, and now you must live with the consequences," I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. The mediator interjected, "Let's focus on the division of assets and any financial settlements. Julia, your lawyer has presented a compelling case for substantial compensation considering Nathan's infidelity and the impact on your life." Nathan bristled at the mention of compensation. "This is extortion. I admit I made mistakes, but to ruin me financially." "Ruin you?" I cut in, my patience wearing thin. "You ruined our marriage, Nathan. Whatever financial consequences you face are the result of your own actions. Actions that have consequences. It's time you learned that." The mediator, sensing the futility of further discussion, moved to finalize the paperwork. The settlement was in my favor, a testament to the strength of my case and the evidence of Nathan's wrongdoing. As we left the mediation room, Nathan paused, turning to me with a look of desperation. "Julia, please, can't we just put this behind us? For the sake of what we had?" what we had. The words were a knife to my heart, a reminder of the love I once felt, now tarnished by betrayal. What we had died the moment you chose Eve over our marriage. Goodbye, Nathan. With those final words, I walked away, leaving Nathan and the wreckage of our marriage behind. The legal battle was over, but the fight to rebuild my life was just beginning. In the weeks that followed, my focus turned to the workshop and the burgeoning success of our family business. The community's support had translated into increased interest in sales, a silver lining in the dark cloud of the past months. Yet, as the business thrived, I couldn't shake the feeling of unfinished business. Nathan and Eve's social and professional downfall was a form of justice, but it was the inner work, the healing and rebuilding of my own life, that required my attention. I poured my energy into the workshop, finding solace in the creation of beautiful things. Each piece I crafted was a step towards healing, a tangible representation of my journey from betrayal to strength. The community event, once a platform for my public vindication, became an annual tradition, a celebration of resilience and the enduring spirit of our town. My story, once a tale of pain and betrayal, had transformed into a narrative of empowerment and renewal. Nathan and Eve faded into the background, their attempts to reclaim their former lives thwarted by their own actions. The community, once deceived by their facade, now saw them for who they truly were. As for me, I emerged from the ordeal stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The betrayal that once threatened to break me had instead forged a new path, one where I stood tall, unafraid, and ready to face whatever the future held. The seasons changed, as did the narrative of my life. The community event had not only become a cornerstone for our family business, but also a testament to the enduring strength of character over the deceit and betrayal that Nathan and Eve had sown. As the workshop flourished, so did my resolve to move past the shadows of my former life. Yet, the true test of my newfound strength was just on the horizon. A year had passed since the divorce was finalized when a twist of fate brought Nathan and Eve back into my orbit. The local news carried stories of a scandal involving a significant business in town, ensnared in deceit and fraudulent activities. At the heart of the scandal were Nathan and Eve, their actions finally catching up to them in a very public downfall. The community's reaction was swift and unforgiving. Nathan and Eve, once fixtures of the social scene, found themselves ostracized, their reputations in tatters. It was during this time that Eve reached out to me, a desperate attempt to salvage what little she could from the ruins of their actions. "Julia, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I'm begging you to listen." Eve's voice trembled over the phone, a stark contrast to the confident woman who had once stood by Nathan's side. "Eve, you're right. You have no right. After everything you and Nathan did, why should I listen to anything you have to say?" My voice was cold, the bitterness of the past still lingering. "I understand your anger, Julia, but it's Nathan. He's in trouble, serious trouble. The business scandal has ruined him, and he's not handling it well," Eve pleaded, desperation coloring her every word. The news of Nathan's downfall, though expected, brought no joy. The man I had once loved, now a shadow of his former self, was a stark reminder of the consequences of one's actions. "Eve, Nathan's troubles are his own making. You both made your choices, and now you must live with them. My life has moved on, and I suggest you do the same," I replied, the finality in my voice leaving no room for further discussion. The call ended, but the news of Nathan's scandal lingered, a topic of hushed conversations and whispered speculations in the community. Yet, amidst the schadenfreude, a sense of closure enveloped me. Nathan and Eve's public downfall was the retribution their actions had wrought, a karmic justice for the pain they had caused. In the wake of their scandal, I found myself reflecting on the journey I had undertaken. From the depths of betrayal to the heights of personal and professional success, my path had been fraught with challenges. Yet each obstacle had only served to strengthen my resolve, to forge me into a woman who faced adversity with grace and determination. The workshop, once a refuge from my pain, had become a beacon of my resilience. The pieces we created, each imbued with the essence of our family's legacy, were more than just objects of beauty. They were symbols of a life reclaimed from the ashes of betrayal. As the scandal surrounding Nathan and Eve faded into the background, my focus remained on the future. The support of the community, once a lifeline in my darkest moments, had become a foundation upon which I built my new life. My story, once marred by the actions of others, was now solely my own, a narrative of triumph over adversity. Nathan and Eve's downfall, while a fitting end to their tale of deceit, was merely a footnote in mine. My journey had taught me that true strength lies not in the vengeance we seek, but in the resilience we demonstrate in the face of life's inevitable trials. As I stood in the workshop, surrounded by the fruits of our labor, I realized that the greatest retribution was not the downfall of those who had wronged me, but the life I had built in spite of them. My legacy would not be defined by Nathan and Eve's betrayal, but by the strength, love, and integrity that had seen me through the storm. And so, with my head held high and my heart at peace, I looked toward the future, ready to embrace whatever it held, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the same strength and resilience that had brought me this far. Nathan and Eve's chapter in my life was closed, but mine was still being written, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome, to heal, and to thrive.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I had always looked up to Charlie, but that wasn't anything unusual. He was 2 years older than me, and he was my brother. When Charlie was 32, he started feeling pain under his arms and a tightness in his throat. Since he had never really been sick before, he tried to brush it off, hoping it would just go away. But after 2 months, the pain persisted, and the tightness in his throat only worsened. It was his wife, Maggie, who finally convinced him to see a doctor and get checked out. On the small island where we all lived, Charlie was the driving force behind everything that happened. After spending 5 years on the mainland for school, he had taken an extra year to travel the world and explore the places he'd always dreamed of as a kid. It was during that journey that he met Maggie and fell in love with her. When Charlie returned to the island with his beautiful Irish bride, Maggie, the disappointment among the local women and girls was palpable. It was no secret that many had secretly hoped Charlie would come back and choose one of them to be his wife. In the week that followed his return, it was said that more island girls lost their virginities than in any previous year. They had been holding out, dreaming that Charlie might pick them. Meanwhile, the boys and men who were the unexpected beneficiaries of this sudden change in heart found themselves not only enjoying these intimate firsts, but also enduring the tears and heartache that came with them. What should have been moments of passion were often interrupted by sobs of lost hopes and unfulfilled fantasies. I myself had been offered numerous opportunities to be the second choice of some of those girls, but I gently turned each offer down, not wanting to serve as a poor second choice or a Charlie substitute. I had hopes of someday finding someone who would want me as her first choice, not as some lesser consolation prize. 10 years later, and I was still looking. The doctor was enough concerned about his earliest preliminary findings that he sent Charlie away for further testing and consultations on the mainland. Charlie spent 2 weeks at Johns Hopkins undergoing a full battery of diagnostic exams. In the end, all the physicians were in agreement about what Charlie was afflicted with, and Charlie was allowed to return to the island to get his final affairs in order. After my father had died, Charlie had inherited the island. He owned everything, lock, stock and barrel, fee simple, and unencumbered. My father had always told us that we, meaning our family, owned the island and other things in an unofficial trust of sorts, a partnership that was implicit, rather than being either a legal obligation or somehow binding on us. We were the caretakers of the island, and ownership was more a legal technicality than an actual state of being. When Charlie returned to die, there were 711 souls living on the island. Word quickly spread about Charlie's condition, and soon the island was in utter turmoil. Uncertainty usually produces fear, and this fear produces some high emotions and panic. When my father had died, everyone had known that Charlie would be taking over, and there was only the sadness at my father's passing. With the news of Charlie's rapidly approaching death, the island residents were fearful of the change that might be coming. This was fueled by a rumor that Maggie was going to sell the island and move back to Ireland with Seamus and Megan, Charlie and Maggie's 2 young children. I didn't see Charlie for several days after he returned. I knew that he'd want to spend time alone with Maggie and his children. I walked the windward side of the island, head down and chin tucked in, dealing in my own quiet way with the loss that I was already feeling. My parents had only been able to produce 2 children before my mother drowned in a sailing accident when I was 2. My father never remarried, and we were raised by most of the island's women. Charlie and I were welcomed in every island home and felt like we both belonged to a huge, extended island family. It never really occurred to me that we were the island's royal family until the week of my father's passing. As I walked back and forth among the dunes and washed up flotsam, I couldn't help wondering what I'd do if Maggie did sell the place of my birth. I'd never left this island because all I had ever wanted was right there for me already. I'd never applied myself in school because Charlie was already taking care of that himself by undertaking a strict and comprehensive course of study. He was being groomed and prepared for the role he would one day have to undertake. As the younger son, I was allowed to indulge myself in whatever made me happy or caught my interest and fancy. I was a decent sailor, able to make my way competently in anything with sails that was under 60 feet in length. I could swim as well as anyone I knew, and I could dive beneath the waves and stay under for 2 minutes or more on a single breath. Climbing the palm and coconut trees was easy for me, and I had hunted the wild pigs with success from the age of 9. I knew everyone on the island, and had never been in a fight or had to strike anyone in anger. Those were my skills and accomplishments, not much in the way of either foundation or preparation, with which to undertake a new career in a strange place where I'd be unknown to everyone. I looked behind me as I walked, hearing a distant voice calling after me. It was Charlie, and he strode after me with his long steps that just seemed to glide above the sand. I never knew how he managed to do that, as I'd sink down to my ankles when I walked along the same sandy path as him. "Grant, hold up now. Don't force me to keep chasing after you." I stopped and waited for him to reach me. When he was close enough, he circled me into his arms, and the two of us shared a moment of closeness and sadness. We didn't discuss the health news, mostly because neither of us had anything to add or say about the medical reality. Charlie loosened one arm from me, and with the other arm he pushed me forward in the direction I had been going before he approached me. "It's good to see you, CC. I was hoping to run into you before now. You got a new girl or something?" "Charlie, I figured I'd give you some time with Fran and the little nippers first. It's gotta be hard trying to explain things to everyone. Doc Mahler told me what the people over at Hopkins said. I don't understand why shit like this has to happen. First Pop, and now you. It's like no one I give a damn about ever makes it past 45 or so. How can you get cancer like that, throughout your whole system, in less than a year?" "Well, the symptoms for a year maybe, but the cancer, who knows when it first started?" I looked at my brother then, waiting for him to tell me about how long he'd felt bad things happening inside him. I wanted to cry, and to go out and destroy something, all at the same time. It was so unfair. It wasn't just Charlie and Maggie and the kids and me. It was the hopes and lifestyles of more than 700 people that were being affected by this cancer. It was killing Charlie, but none of the rest of us were exactly going to escape untouched by it. I've got 2 or 3 months CC, that's what we need to worry about now. We need to make sure that everything can go on pretty much like before, after my time is done. It's going to be up to you, big guy. That's what Maggie and I decided. I stopped and just stared at him. There was no way that he could even believe that I could fill in for him. I didn't want to, that was the first thing, but even if I did, I wasn't qualified to do it. I'd watched him preparing for years to do what he now did. I remember the first year or two after Dad died, the 16 and 18-hour days that Charlie had to put in 7 days a week. All the daily decisions that needed to be made, and how one thing always affected 10 others. Charlie made mistakes too, plenty of them in the beginning, and that's where most of the time was spent, doing things to make the mistakes less costly and harmful to the island. Our economy was a fragile thing, and not at all self-sustaining. Food had to be shipped in, and money that we made in mainland investments had to be used to keep everything balanced and working. I knew nothing about how things worked on the island. I turned on the shower, but I didn't know what it took to keep all the pipes working and the water supply clean and safe. Those were Charlie's responsibilities. Maggie needs to sell the island, then Charlie. I can't do it. He just looked at me with those sad eyes that I'd seen all of my life. It always hurt me more to disappoint Charlie than anyone else, even our father. He knew I wasn't trained for this. It wasn't fair for him to ask me either. "We're not selling CC. It isn't an option, so just forget that, okay? When I die, the island goes to you. I don't control it, that's in the original charter. Maggie won't be leaving. Megan and Seamus, this island is their birthright, so they aren't leaving either. You need to be the caretaker now. When Seamus gets older, if you've done a good job and gotten him trained right, maybe then you can turn it over to him and go back to sailing and fishing and hunting all day. Not before then, though. Do a good enough job, and you'll get to sit back when you're 55 and start living your perfect life again. I can't do it. Nothing you can say is going to make me qualified to do it, Charlie. Maybe we can hire someone to come over and manage it for us? I really feel bad for you, Grant. If I could change places with you, I would. I'm sure you think that my dying is a lot easier than your having to take care of things for a few years. To me, though, I'd love the chance to stick around and do what I always planned on doing. You didn't ever plan for anything, CC. Don't you think it might have been a good idea to look in once in a while, just to see how things ran? Didn't it ever occur to you that this day might come? You're 30, and you've never done a day's work in your life. You need to grow up, and it better be fast, because in a month, when my strength starts to fail, and they're shooting me up with painkillers, you won't have anyone else to answer the questions that you need to be asking me now. You never asked me to learn anything, Charlie. Today's the first I've heard that I was your backup plan for the island. Couldn't you have at least warned me, or dropped a few hints? I was scared and, maybe, more than a little bit pissed at how he was treating me now. All of my life, I checked with Charlie about almost every decision I'd made. When Dad died, I never did anything without Charlie telling me that it was okay. He wasn't being fair now. I'm sorry, CC. You're right. I thought there was more time and that it wasn't necessary for you to learn. I'm sorry. I guess I just don't want everyone to suffer because I wasn't prudent enough to anticipate this possibility. I'm scared now more than I've ever been. Not just of dying, although that's no picnic either. I'm scared for Maggie and the kids, for you, and for the island and all its people. I've botched things up badly, and I need you to step in and pull everyone out of the mess I've made. I'm a poor steward, and Dad would be disappointed in how I'm leaving the responsibility he entrusted to me. I hadn't seen Charlie cry since my father's funeral, almost 9 years before. Both of us were crying now. I couldn't do what he wanted me to do, but I couldn't let him die thinking that his whole life, and what he believed had been his sole purpose for existence, was ending in abject failure either. Charlie, if you could learn it, how hard can it be? You think I can learn it all in a single day? Or should I plan on it taking 2 or 3? He looked at me with the look I'd always wanted from him. We walked back to his office at the plantation. He started right in during the walk back, letting me know that Maggie would be a big help to me, and telling me who on the island really understood how different things worked. When we got to his office, he started in by showing me where all the paperwork was kept and how the various accounts were all interconnected with each other. We sold tea, tobacco leaf, sugar, and fish to the mainland and bought almost everything else we needed from them. There was a complicated investment portfolio which had to generate sufficient income to pay for the difference between what we earned from sales and what we spent for supplies and for replacement parts for the worn-out island systems. We had no phones, and our electricity came from 3 small diesel generators and some windmills hooked up to batteries. Our water system was a natural cistern and jerry-rigged pipes that had been set up and added to in a haphazard manner over the past 50 years. It cost my family more than $100,000 of our family's investment income every year to keep the island economy afloat. In the 8+ years that Charlie had charge of the island, family income from island activities had dropped to the point where we were dipping into investment principal every year for the past 4 years. This year, our annual shortfall was projected to be more than $20,000. Of the 700 residents on our island, only 60 or so contributed to our economy in any direct manner. Until that day, I was one of the heavy majority that had contributed nothing. We owned a store on the island, but people just came by and took what they wanted or needed, and wrote down in a book the things that they'd like us to get for them. No one ever paid for anything. Charlie told me that was how it had always been, and that was how our father told him to continue doing it. I used that month he'd promised me, and a lot more besides. As Charlie began taking more and more pain medicine, the time we spent together became more about 2 brothers saying goodbye, and less about the old guy breaking in the new guy to the workings of his job. Charlie began to slowly disconnect and drift away from all of us. Cancer can be all-consuming, eating away at more than just the interior organs of its victim. The day finally came when Maggie begged me to leave Charlie alone with her and the children. She felt that seeing me made Charlie feel his guilt at having somehow failed the island more intensely. She wanted him to die surrounded by the successes of his short life, and not what he perceived as his failures. Reluctantly, I said goodbye and told him that I loved him. As tradition demanded, the plantation bell was rung 5 times, telling the island that Charlie was finally at peace. I heard the bell as I walked not far from where Charlie had caught me that day when he first told me that I was to be his successor. I dropped to my knees and finally let out my own anger and my own very real fear of failure. With Charlie now dead, some large part of me wanted to jump in one of the fishing boats and head off to the mainland. I knew I could easily lose myself in one of the cities on the coast and find a way to live out my life being only responsible for myself. If I'd done what I wanted to do, this would be a far different story. It was dark out when I finally got my emotional things together and stood back up and walked home to my small shack. I got up in my hammock and rocked myself to sleep. Life on the island for me had always been so simple. I fished and hunted and walked all over watching to see what everyone else was doing. When I got hungry, I went to someone's house and they fed me and gave me something to drink. In 30 years, no one had ever turned me away. I would take my fish and bring them to houses and divide the catch up among the people who fed me. The same held true for any wild pig that I killed. I often helped people trap sea turtles and to harvest the delicious sea turtle eggs when they were laid and covered on the beach. Coconuts, mangoes, pomegranates, bananas, and other fruits could be picked from the trees while I was walking around. I knew who liked what and would often drop things off as I walked by. Rock lobster was something I had to dive for, but I knew all the places where they could be found and was always ready to go for a quick dive. When Charlie died, my perfect island lifestyle died with him. We buried him next to my father, and near the headstone we'd put up for my mother when she drowned and her body hadn't been found. Tradition dictated that I needed to speak at every island funeral now. Charlie's funeral was my first official act as the new owner. I said some words and spoke of what Charlie had meant to me, and about how he always wanted to do his best for the island. I told the people that Charlie had been the last of the traditionally trained owners, and that I would be flying without a compass or any training to speak of. I ended by telling them all that there would be big changes coming, and that they better get prepared. After the funeral, I walked Maggie and the kids back to the plantation, and then I turned to head back to my shack. "Where are you going, Grant? Your place is here now. I've moved all of our things out of the big room. That's where you are to live now. I'm staying in Poppy's old room until the children and I decide what we'll be doing." After my mother had died, my father couldn't stand their huge bedroom suite anymore, and so he'd moved everything of his out to a big downstairs room on the leeward side of the great plantation house. His room had opened up to the veranda in the side yard, and that was where he'd spent the remainder of his life. That room was right next to Charlie's office, now mine. I had to keep reminding myself. I had planned to use Pop's old room myself on nights when the weather was bad and I didn't feel like walking back over to my shack. When Charlie and Maggie came back to the island, my father had installed them in the main suite where he and my mother had spent their entire married life. No one had asked me or told me of their plans for me living there. I didn't think I'd be comfortable living up there in that room that was more than 3 times as big as my comfortable shack. I hadn't slept in a real bed for more years than I cared to remember. I didn't think that it was a good day to upbraid Maggie for being presumptuous about dictating where I was to sleep. I knew that I could hang my hammock out on the upstairs balcony anyway. My parents had a hammock out there for many years, and my father had left it when he moved out of the room. It was gone now, but I could get another, or make a new one if I had to. I went upstairs after telling the family good night, and found that someone had packed up most of my things in wooden boxes and carted them over from my shack. My old hammock was on top of one of the boxes, and it only took me 10 minutes to plait a braid that extended the hammock to fit the 2 large hooks that stretched across the veranda railing's 6x6 support beams. It was a little lower than I was used to, but it would serve unless a rain squall came in from the east. Luckily, that was very unlikely for another 6 months. I slept out on the balcony, comfortable enough considering that it was the first time I'd been back sleeping in the plantation since I was 12 years old. My father hadn't believed in being too controlling of his children, especially with me. He pretty much let me make my own living and eating decisions as long as I reported in to either him or Charlie at least a couple of times each week. In the 10 years before his death, I couldn't remember my father ever needing to come looking for me. I would see him almost every day anyway, because the island wasn't that large, and because I made it a point to see a lot of the island every single day. I may not have done much that was productive, but I made sure that everyone knew that I was still around and willing to pitch in if needed. I came downstairs at about 7 the next morning and went into the owner's office. For the first time, I sat down at Charlie's desk and swiveled in his chair. I was 4 months from my 31st birthday. I stood at about 6'1" and weighed somewhere near 190. I could read and write and do sums to at least a 10th grade level. There wasn't a single paper in the owner's office that I'd ever signed myself, not a contract or agreement that I'd ever approved or ratified, but by some process that I still didn't understand and knew that I had never really agreed to, I found myself responsible for everything on the island. My island now, and my responsibility too. I wasn't qualified by either skill or temperament for the job I found myself filling, but I do my best and hope that a combination of luck and willing knowledgeable advisors would see me through until Seamus was ready and able to take over for me. My goal was simple. I wanted to keep the island afloat financially until then, and I'd try to see that everyone here could go about their normal lives able to live like we'd all lived for the past 100 years or so, on this beautiful serene island of ours. When I saw the double doors to my father's old room open sometime within that first hour that I was sitting in Charlie's chair, I was caught up in the sight that Maggie gave me as she stood between me and the morning light wearing a thin white nightgown. With the strong sunlight behind her, I could plainly see the outline of her body underneath her gown. She was a gorgeous woman. Although caring for Charlie in the last days of his illness had taken its toll, her clear, fair Irish complexion and her wonderfully muscled and toned body were on full display. I'd always marveled at Charlie for summoning the confidence to have ever approached this Irish goddess, and never more so than when I saw her standing there in that light, posing for me, both of us knowing that this was a deliberate act on her part. It constituted an unequivocal offer, I was sure. It appeared that my beautiful sister-in-law had made a momentous decision about her own future, and about the futures of her children as well. I found myself wondering whether it had been her decision, or something that Charlie had pressed upon her. I had never been with a woman. This was a decision that I had made on my own. Over the years I'd had many opportunities, but I'd never given in to my desires and cravings. I'd carried a vision of what I wanted in a woman. Maggie, silhouetted in that sunlight, surpassed that vision in almost every aspect. I felt myself grow hard. At the same time, I was determined that I'd do nothing to dishonor either her memory of Charlie, or the high regard I held both of them in. I stood up from my chair, aware of the unmistakable outline against my thin white trousers, a flush of embarrassment creeping up as I tried to keep my composure. I bowed slightly in her direction, acknowledging her even though I couldn't trust my voice to speak to her right then. I walked outside and went looking for a morning meal. Surely Maggie knew that this was going to complicate my situation, at a time when I was already overwhelmed. I closed my eyes and traced mentally the shape that she had so casually allowed me to see. Charlie had once told me that Maggie was unlike any woman he'd ever known. He hinted that he'd known his fair share, and more, while attending university. As I'd admitted to having had no experience with girls or women, Charlie had not attempted to go into specifics with me. She's the perfect balance and blend CC, no inhibitions or holdbacks. She has beauty, brains, and an unlimited ability to enjoy life. I tried to get her to bring Fiona, her sister, here for you, but she absolutely refused to. We'd never spoken of her like that again, but I remembered the look on his face as he described her. Charlie had never seemed more enviable than at that moment in time. While he lived, I'd coveted nothing of Charlie's. Was I going to end up taking his place in every aspect of his life? Would I somehow lose myself, my own identity, and become Charlie's surrogate, a father to his children, husband to his wife? Is that what I'd settle for? I could certainly have settled for far less. I spent all of the next month doing a careful, house-by-house census of the island's population. It had shocked me when Charlie had claimed that only 60 people contributed directly and positively to the island's economy. There were now 710 of us living on the island. My preliminary data showed that there were 47 children under age 5, 32 age 5 to 9, 47 between 10 and 15 years old, and 14 that were between 16 and 17. Under children, I had a total of 140. There were 74 boys and 66 girls. None of the children had jobs that made material contributions to the island economy. There were 211 island residents between the age of 18 and 34. Of these, 113 were males, and 98 were females. 31 of the males were engaged in productive labor that benefited the island economy. 11 of the females were productive in the economy as well. This meant that 169 people in our prime working age demographic were uninvolved in producing anything that directly contributed to the economy of the island. I was shocked when I saw that number. I wondered how my family could have permitted and allowed something like that to take place. I knew that I had long been one of the residents that was non-productive, but I hadn't realized that I was the norm rather than an exception. I began to see why Charlie had encountered so much trouble balancing the income with the outgo. The 35 to 59 age group contained 346 residents. This consisted of 133 males and 213 females. 21 of the males were productive to the island economy, as were 14 of the females. Again, that meant that 311 in that age group were classified as economically non-productive. There were 13 residents aged 60 or more. Our oldest resident was Granny Torres, who claimed to be 97, but was probably closer to 80 from the ages of her children still living on the island. Tony, her eldest, was 57, and he remembered his mother being a young and pretty woman when he was growing up. The other 12 were 60 to 70, and were all females for some reason. Tony Torres was our oldest resident male at 57 years 9 months of age. None of the eldest residents were economically productive for the island. By my tally, 77 people added to the wealth of the island. That was a better number than Charlie had given me, but that still represented barely more than 10% of our population. I knew all of these people too, and I knew that many of them were close to being self-sufficient in terms of meeting their own food needs and in maintaining their homes and the paths leading from their properties to the central congregating areas of the island. It wasn't all simple black and white numbers that I was dealing with. We had 40 people engaging in our commercial fishing fleet, but there were another 6 that operated the boat that delivered fish to the mainland. Only 2 people grew our tea, but 7 others worked the harvest that occurred several times each year. 5 of the tea harvesters also worked in the fishing industry as well. 3 people tended the tobacco leaf growing, but they grew their tobacco on pieces of land maintained by several other families who didn't participate in the planting, tending, or harvesting. The sugar cane was spread out on one whole side of the island. Many people worked in the cane fields during harvest, but only 5 spent time clearing and burning the fields for later new growth. There probably wasn't a house on the island that didn't have 3 or more machetes that were kept sharp and ready to help with the cane harvests. I had always worked the cane harvest for at least a portion of the cycles. Another fact I unearthed was that our commercial fishing hadn't produced a net operating profit in the past 7 years. Our boats were in degraded shape, and we had no one on our island who was able to perform anything more complicated than simple maintenance on the engines on any of the boats. We had lost a lot of our fishing skills when people who knew their trade had stopped teaching it to our young. More than half of our total workforce was involved in plying a trade that wasn't making us any money. If we used profit as a standard to judge productive labor, we had 27 people engaged in work that returned a profit to the island. I started looking closer at the investment returns that Charlie had been getting. What I found really made me nervous. My father had generated a steady 5% return on average each year. It varied from 4.83% to 5.21% over the 23 years he was in charge of investments. Charlie had averaged just over 13.73% per year. There was no way that I could ever equal that kind of high return, and it would be crazy for me to even attempt it. Charlie was investing in sophisticated leveraged investments where he was separating different components of yields and selling off the separated pieces as desirable strips. He was also trading in energy futures and clean air credits. I had no idea how to do any of that and didn't even have my own checking or savings account. Maggie, can you please come help me with this? I was out in the hall in front of the plantation office when my sister-in-law was walking by. I showed her the notes I'd made detailing Charlie's annual income yields and asked her if she knew how he'd managed to perform so well year after year. That's what he studied in school, Grant. Finance was his main field of study, you know? He was always most confident about that aspect of his stewardship. To him, none of the rest of it made any financial sense. He said it was just as well that we grew tobacco leaf for cigars since we were more communistic than Fidel in Cuba. Have you figured out about the fishing business yet? You mean that it loses money every year? Yeah, I figured that out too. At least we make money with the cane and the tea and the tobacco leaf. Charlie wanted me to tell you that you need to keep the fishing fleet going though because it produces a tax write-off greater than its cash-on-cash losses. Charlie offset all of the gains from the agriculture by the paper losses on the fishing. He said that we eat a lot of the fish that are caught, and they don't count against us as income. Also, the diesel fuel for the fleet is used to power the island generators. Without the fishing, we wouldn't have electricity when we need it. Some of the batteries for the windmills are also part of the fishing fleet components. All of this information made me realize that I had to get greater detail before I could start making meaningful decisions about island economy changes. Well, at least I had a better handle on who wasn't working and producing for the island. The next day, I rode to the mainland when they delivered our fishing catch to the cannery. It was my first time on the mainland, and I'd only ever been to 3 or 4 other small islands before, and that had been when I was out sailing with my father. It was somewhat intimidating seeing how big the city was where we landed, and it only had a population of 70,000. I wondered what New York or Chicago looked like. I went to the unemployment office there and signed up to talk with a counselor. When I explained why I had come to see him, he thought that I was crazy. I assured him that all of the island inhabitants were U.S. citizens and showed him the part I'd read from one of their pamphlets about training programs for the chronically unemployed workers. He took me over and introduced me to a nice lady who was his supervisor. She listened politely to what I had to say, taking notes from time to time, and then told me that they would send out a team to verify my claims on the island. I offered to transport her team round trip for $300, and that included 2-night stay at the plantation. She told me that she'd have to get back to me about that. I gave her our mainland post office box and told her that we only picked up our mail on Tuesdays and Fridays when our fleet delivery boat was in the city. I hurried back to the cannery dock and could see that everyone had been waiting around for me to get back aboard. I didn't get back to the plantation until after 9 that night. I was hungry when I got in and had to knock on Maggie's bedroom door to ask her where some food was that it wouldn't cause a problem for me to eat. She got up and made me 2 nice ham and grilled cheese sandwiches. When she put them down in front of me, I thanked her, and bit right into one of them. It was good, and I told her so. She told me that it had been one of Charlie's favorites when he needed to stay up and work late. How did you like the mainland, Grant? Was it truly your first time going there? She sat down at the table with me, and I told her what I'd seen and done over there. After I told her what I had been trying to get accomplished with the unemployment office, Maggie laughed and clapped her hands together. When I told her that I had offered transportation and lodging for $300, I was afraid she would cough up a lung as hard as she was laughing. It took only 2 weeks before the team made arrangement with us to transport them out to the island so that they could conduct field interviews for skilled training placements for 300 of our residents. I selected the 300 that I wanted interviewed and explained to all of them what we were doing and why it needed to be done. I wanted some of our residents to learn new and hopefully valuable skills, but I also wanted to take full advantage of the money that the government was willing to spend to train and retrain workers who came from certain categories of the labor force. I had farm workers, cane harvesters, displaced fishermen, and tobacco industry workers. All 3 of these category of workers was entitled by federal mandate to training and either extended unemployment benefits or training living allowances. I had several buildings that were currently in use that could be leased to the government and used for training, and 9 unused bedrooms in the plantation house that I could rent out nightly to teachers and program administrators. We had 3 boats that were licensed to carry up to 15 passengers with the tickets held by our captains and the certifications of the boats themselves. The interview process took longer than we expected, but we finally managed to get 214 of our applicants accepted in one retraining program or another. I made the state a good offer on 3 training buildings and got a sign lease for 6 of our plantation rooms at $30 per night per room. We served 3 meals per day, and they cost $15 a day. It was a family-style menu, and each guest had to either opt in or take care of his or her own food needs. With all of the rentals, leases, and transports, the island was taking in over $4,000 per week. The residents in training for the various programs were being paid $784 per month per student, and the shortest training program was for 13 weeks. Maggie acted as hostess for the plantation rooms, and we brought in several residents to cook and help with the room cleanups and the linen and towel laundering. Maggie and I jointly decided that we wouldn't take any of the training money from the residents, but that we were going to start charging people for a lot of the things they were ordering from our store. For the first time in our store's 50-year history, it started showing an income. Not a profit, but having an income was a great beginning for us. People started getting used to paying for the things that they wanted or thought they needed. I used some of the money coming in from the unemployment training to get an unemployed marine maintenance and engine mechanic to come over to the island and work on the fleet engines and to help train a few of our residents in marine maintenance. We let him stay in my old shack, and he got his meals with the families of the people he was providing training to. His classroom was whichever boat he was currently working on. All his people seemed to be learning good skills, and our fishing fleet started looking like it might not sink if caught in any type of real seas. I withdrew the old directive that Charlie had issued where the boats had to stay within sight of the island at all times. This allowed the boats to go out to areas where the prospects of a good catch were far better. It didn't seem like it was possible, but all too quickly a year had passed since Charlie had died. Maggie and the children dressed up in their best clothes and went up to the hill and visited Charlie's grave. I had been going up there 2 or 3 times a week, quietly and all by myself, explaining some of my ideas to Charlie and talking about the processes I had gone through to arrive at the decisions I had been making. I knew that Charlie wasn't in a position to hear me, or certainly to make comments or suggestions, but I still wanted to run some of the things by him, if only to get them better organized in my own mind. While I was up there, I decided that it wouldn't hurt anything to let him know about the thoughts I'd been having about Maggie and the future I hoped she and I might have together someday. Maggie had done some other things to let me know that she was available to me if I was interested. I was very interested, but I wanted to wait for the whole year, and to also make sure that she didn't think that I thought I was exercising some right of inheritance with her. She and Charlie had been good together, but I was no Charlie. I waited another week, until the weekend when all the guests had returned back to the mainland for a period of time. I arranged for 2 island women to come over early and get Seamus and Megan and take them down for their first cane harvesting party. I watched from my balcony as the children were led away from the plantation house, and then I got dressed and went down to my office and knocked on those big double doors that connected the 2 rooms. "Come in, Grant." My heart was beating quicker than normal, and I was as nervous as I ever remembered being. There weren't many men still untried and tested with women at my age. I opened the doors and looked over at Maggie, who was lying in her bed, her head and back propped up on several pillows. Her red hair was still piled up in the bun she tied it in when going to bed at night. She was still in her night clothes and had her covers pulled up almost to her neck. She was lovely just like she was. No makeup or other adornments were necessary to make her more beautiful. I knew some of the pleasure Charlie must have felt seeing her like that almost every single morning of his adult life. As I walked over to the side of her bed, I knew that nothing I'd prepared or rehearsed would serve me as I tried to convince her that I was someone who could offer her a better life than what she now enjoyed. I found myself losing the little bit of confidence that I'd managed to build up after reviewing all that had happened in the year since Charlie had died and left me in charge. It was true that we had generated enough in island revenues that we hadn't needed to use any of the meager profits our mainland investments had produced. I generated a whopping 3.03%, more than 10 full percentage points of gain, less than Charlie's career average return. I was no Charlie, but I was sure that Maggie was all too aware of that. "Maggie, I wanted to see you today. I think it's time the two of us had a discussion to see if there is some way the two of us can be more together." I stopped and waited to see if she would stop me or divert me from stating my case to her. She was still smiling at me, so I took that as a positive sign and started to move further into my plea. "I know that you were used to Charlie, that it was him that you loved and married and made a family together with. I always said that I wanted my own woman, someone who wouldn't feel like she had to settle for less than Charlie." Maggie held up her hand then and stopped me before I could continue on. "Grant, Charlie isn't here. If he were, neither of us would be having this conversation, would we? I'm still here, though, and I don't have to choose between you and Charlie. I'd be choosing between you and whoever else the island might turn up to court me. Who would you say gives you the most competition for the women's affections here on the island, Grant?" If I was to answer my own question, I'd be forced to admit that no one does. I'm afraid, though, that you will always try to measure up to the impossibly high standards that you have always attributed to your brother. He warned me that you would do that, you know? When he got sick, he was always talking about how disappointed in him you'd be when you discovered how poorly he'd managed the island's resources. He told me that you'd do a better job because you really knew everyone on the island, and that you'd made all of them your family for your entire life. Charlie could never have done that, Grant. His gift wasn't that broad. The money he made with the mainland investments, it wasn't sustainable, Grant. You saw the risks he was forced to take each year as the other island incomes tapered off. He projected that he'd need to earn 25% annual returns within 2 more years just to not deplete the principal every year. He stood pacing in his office late on many nights, telling me that it just wasn't possible to do. In a year, you've instituted sustainable growth and changes to the economy of the island. You've gotten residents to train and acquire the skills that can produce money to keep our island on a firm economic footing for many years to come. The fishing was profitable, cash on cash, for the first time in many years. The people who live here are looking forward to the coming years, unlike the way it's been for the decade or two before. They have hope that something good is in their futures. Hope is crucial for happiness. I want to live here with you, to help raise Seamus and Megan, and to try to do my best for the people here, our island family. I don't want to be a piece in your life's puzzle, Grant. I need to be a hunger deep inside you that nothing else will satisfy. I need a man with a passion for life. Can you summon up some passion, Grant?" "I don't know, Maggie. I've never tried to. Charlie told me something else too, Grant, because he knew that you could probably make it to this point, but that then you'd pull back and try to play it safe again. He said that has been your pattern since childhood. He told me to help you get past that one stumbling block that always seemed to stop you from pressing forward with your plans." As she spoke, Maggie shrugged out of her night clothes. I watched her with fascination as she managed somehow to do that while still keeping her covers up so that nothing important got exposed. "I'm totally naked now, Grant. Underneath this coverlet, there is no obstruction to what you claim you want. You have to come forward, though, to claim it, because I won't go farther than this." She lay there, supported with her pillows and keeping the comforter secure up to her neck. I wanted to rip off that cover and feast my eyes on her naked body. I wanted to throw off my own clothes and ravish her the way I knew that Charlie would have done. Instead, I stood there thinking of Charlie and knowing that she could never accept me like she'd accepted him. She was staring right at my face, and I knew that she could tell that my passions weren't adequate to the challenge she had issued. I began the slow process of withdrawal, knowing that some things were never meant to be. I'd done all that I was capable of doing. I'd said what I'd come to say and offered her what I had to give. I had been right from the beginning, and that was why I'd never been willing to be the consolation prize for those that preferred Charlie to me. I didn't blame them for preferring him. I just didn't choose to settle for being second choice. I turned away, obeying that tight knot in my stomach that urged me to flee before it got even worse. I made it to the office doors before she called out my name again. "You, Grant, I choose you." I turned around and she had thrown off the covers. I drank in all of her loveliness in one giant, visual gulp. She was all that I'd imagined, and then some more. It took several seconds for my feet to turn and head back to the bed. Somehow, I'd shed all of my clothes by the time I managed to crawl into the bed with her. She had chosen me. If she hadn't, she wouldn't have called me and thrown away her covers. I remember starting with her face and kissing her wherever I could manage to reach. I fumbled, I'm sure, not knowing where to pay attention to next. I allowed myself to act and react, forgetting for a time that I had no real idea about how I needed to proceed. I'm sure she helped me all along the way, but that's only because I somehow wound up buried inside her and letting my instincts point me to where I wanted to go. I gave her the passion she'd asked for, more passion than I ever knew I had within me. I heard myself yelling and crying and laughing and moaning as I strove forward to achieve the joining that I'd never before known. There came a time when I simply couldn't move without the exquisite feeling of impending explosion overpowering any thought processes I still was capable of producing. I knew that if I pressed forward that I'd simply explode and cease to exist. There wasn't any way that I could do what I needed to do and still continue breathing. I didn't back away from it, though. I was committed to the end. There wasn't anything on this side that was important enough to stop me from going over to the other side where I needed to be. For the first time in my life, I simply trusted myself and let it all go. After a lifetime of holding back, the letting go was beyond my description capabilities. When I had finished letting go, I knew that I'd be able to do it again now that I'd once discovered how to do it. I love you, Maggie. Thank you for your gift. That was the morning I received Charlie's legacy. He had started planning it for me soon after he found out that he was dying. Somehow he knew that I would always need that big push. His dying pushed me, and then Maggie took that last necessary push to get me to see that I was the one who kept setting up the barriers that no one could ever knock down. She was all that he'd told me she was, and she made me more than I thought I'd ever be. Seamus is on his way back to the island now. His degree is in his hand, and he's coming back with his college sweetheart. He and I will start in by sharing the tasks of running the island. He can do the planning, and I'll look after the implementing of his plans. Maggie and I have 2 children of our own, Alexander and Sophie. Sophie takes after Maggie and is filled with all of life's exuberances. At 10, she already shows promise of being the kind of woman her mother has always been. There is no one on the island that will have the slightest chance of winning her favor, though. Alexander takes after his dad. He rummages around the island, getting into everything he can find. He moved into my old shack when he was 11, and we only see him in passing when he's going to or coming from another island adventure. Maggie doesn't worry about him, and she has the highest of hopes that he'll one day assist Seamus in the caretaking roles that are too much for any one man to handle. I'm starting to think about taking Maggie and Sophie up to New York one of these days. There must be someone up there who has all the requirements to meet Sophie's high standards. I wonder who it is that runs that other island? The one they call Manhattan. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Why am I driving to my mother's house at 11 o'clock at night in the pouring rain? Why are my husband and children safe and dry at home, probably already asleep in their beds? Why did Bradley threaten to divorce me? I haven't even done anything. What the heck is going on? Why won't anybody talk to me? My name is Emma Smith. Except professionally, I go by my maiden name, Johnson. My husband, Bradley, never had a problem with that. He understood how important it was to me that I earned my degrees and certifications in clinical psychology under my own name before we got married. He was always supportive, and that's why we didn't have the ceremony until I was 26. That day, just over 9 years ago, was probably the happiest day of my life. We had the perfect wedding, not too big, not too small, and all of our families were there. My father, Jim, is an amazing dancer. He'd been taking lessons for something like 15 years. That's how he met his wife, Grace. Technically, she's my stepmom, but I was already 17 when they first met, so she didn't have a hand in raising me. My mother, Linda, was also there with her fourth husband, Glenn. Having them all together at the wedding was a major feat of diplomacy, but it went smoothly. I even saw Mom sitting at a table with Dad and Grace while I was dancing with Bradley. After the father-daughter dance, we wanted to start our family right away since we'd waited to get married. Braylon is 8 and Caden is 6. A girl and a boy, 2 years apart. Just like me and my younger brother Tommy. I know it's silly, but it makes me feel like I accomplished everything correctly. They're at home now, and I'm not. I should go back. I don't know why I should have to do this. I belong in my house with my family, and Bradley needs to just get over his hurt feelings and accept what's going to happen. I need to go back home. I need to make things right with him, but I can't. I'm not welcome. I should explain. I arrived home early, as I'd planned. I had the groceries I needed for Bradley's favorite dinner, my mom's meatloaf recipe, believe it or not, and a nice bottle of red wine, Idaho potatoes, sour cream, chives, Wisconsin cheddar cheese, and Brussels sprouts. I know lots of people don't like them, but I roast them with olive oil and a little salt and pepper, and they're just perfect. Key lime pie for dessert. Oh, and a few delicate little things I'd picked up at Victoria's Secret that Tuesday, so we'd spend the weekend making things special before I left for my conference. The one he didn't know about yet. The one I was planning on telling him about after dinner. It took me almost an hour to get everything ready. While the meatloaf was in the oven, I cleaned off the table and vacuumed the dining room, put out the good place settings, and had time to shower, do my hair and makeup, and slip into my new blue dress. The color really brings out my eyes. I dressed it up with a necklace Bradley had given me for our 5th anniversary. The kids liked my meatloaf okay, but I had to make mac and cheese for them since they wouldn't eat the potatoes or the sprouts. The instant he got home, after picking up the kids, the show began. Braylon and Caden tore around like the whirlwinds they are, and we barely managed to change their shoes and put away their things before dinner. I served their food, got them seated, and was pouring the wine when Bradley joined us, his eyebrow raised in question. I just smiled, beaming the most loving, adoring smile I could muster. It only seemed to make him more concerned. Everyone was happy and pleased. They all praised my cooking. The kids devoured their meal and even had a small slice of key lime pie each. Caden didn't like his, saying it tasted sour. Braylon finished it for him after we settled them in front of their favorite movie, one they'd seen countless times. Bradley nudged me back into the dining room, where he had already tidied up and loaded the dishwasher. He poured the last of the red wine for me, and a finger of Glenmorangie for himself, neat, before taking his seat. He inquired if I would disclose the reason behind the evening's special arrangements, questioning if I couldn't surprise him without a particular occasion. I expressed my enjoyment of the evening and acknowledged the effort put into the dinner, but highlighted that it wasn't a birthday, anniversary, or any special day. It was simply a Friday night, prompting him to inquire further. I admitted to playfully deceiving him, hinting that I might need his help next week. He asked about the nature of the favor, and I explained that I would be attending a conference in Chicago for 4 days, from Tuesday to Friday, requiring him to take on the role of a single dad temporarily. His demeanor shifted slightly as he acknowledged the responsibility he would have to shoulder in my absence. Anticipating our time apart, I teased him with promises of a passionate weekend together before my departure. I leaned forward, adding a suggestive glance to my words, hinting at the excitement to come upon my return. He nodded skeptically, questioning why he was just hearing about the conference at that moment. I explained that the invitation had recently come up, highlighting that I had only been invited and hadn't discussed it earlier. Despite my attempts to reassure him, he expressed his disappointment at being informed late and his concern about the situation. My attempts to calm him down seemed to have the opposite effect. He suddenly stood up, gesturing for me to remain seated, and muttered his frustration, clearly upset. He tried to control his emotions, acknowledging his desire to avoid arguing in front of the children. He instructed me to put the kids to bed and indicated that he needed time to gather his thoughts before continuing the discussion. With a tense grip on the chair, he shook his head and went upstairs, leaving me to reflect on how the conversation had not gone as planned. He spent the next 20 minutes pacing around the house like an agitated tiger. Glancing at his phone, he'd angrily read something, mutter curses under his breath, and resume pacing. At one point, he made a call and left a voicemail, saying, "It's Bradley. She's acting like Linda right now. It's happening now. Please call me the instant you get this." What on earth did acting like Linda mean? What did my mom have to do with this? Not long after, his phone rang, and he stepped outside to take the call, shooting me a glare. Clearly, he didn't want me or the kids to overhear. He returned inside, but was called out again after a brief moment. The kids seemed puzzled, but unfazed by his behavior. As the movie neared its end, he disappeared into the kitchen, where I heard his coffee grinder buzzing. Surprisingly, Braylon and Caden didn't resist their bedtime routine much, brushing their teeth and getting into pajamas without fuss. Somehow, they sensed that something was amiss. I, too, felt jittery throughout. What was troubling him? What did he know? Who was he talking to? And why bring up Mom? With the kids tucked in, I descended to find Bradley back at the table with a full pot of coffee, 2 mugs, and a large Yeti cup. He instructed me to sit, and I obeyed. He poured the coffee, but I declined, mentioning that it would keep me awake. He insisted, saying I would need it. I pressed him to tell me what was bothering him, and he responded by saying he would if I would, assuring me that nothing was wrong. He explained that I was worrying unnecessarily, emphasizing that it was just a conference, a one-time event that I needed to do for myself. I questioned his motives, and he reaffirmed his stance, saying it was exactly as he had stated. He expressed dissatisfaction with the taste of the coffee, prompting me to question what was wrong. Despite my reassurance that the coffee was fine, he began a conversation by asking if I considered him stupid. After affirming that I didn't, he questioned whether I believed myself to be smarter due to my graduate degree in psychology. I denied this and affirmed my respect for him as my husband, partner, and human being. He emphasized the importance of honesty in our conversation and warned against half-truths or sugarcoating. He insisted that he knew more about the situation than I thought and cautioned against lying or manipulation, emphasizing that it wouldn't end well if I attempted to deceive him. I assured him that I would never deceive him, but suggested that he might be deceiving himself. He questioned when I was invited to the conference and how long I had known about it. I explained that I had only mentioned it that evening, claiming it had just happened. He pressed further, asking if I had known before Tuesday, and implying that I had planned the evening to soften him up for the news. I defended myself, insisting it wasn't like that, but his silence spoke volumes. I suggested that we go through the questions again. He asked who had invited me to the conference, to which I replied it was a colleague. He continued to inquire about who was covering the expenses for my attendance, pressing for a direct answer. I mentioned that I would reimburse them, but he insisted on a clearer response regarding who had arranged the fees, airfare, and accommodation. He expressed concern over our account statements for the past 3 months, suggesting that either I had planned this earlier or had undisclosed accounts. Despite his evident upset, I reassured him that he had nothing to worry about. He asked if Richard Taylor was attending the conference. I started feeling a surge of dread. A voice in my head mocked me for being foolish, but I pushed back, telling it to shut up and insisting that Bradley didn't know anything for certain. I admitted that Richard might be there, as he was presenting on Wednesday. Bradley showed me the conference agenda on his phone, expressing surprise that I didn't know about it, given my close friendship and professional relationship with Richard. I confessed that I did know, but had forgotten. Bradley urged me to stop making up stories and reminded me that he wasn't foolish, leaving me with nothing more to say. Bradley suggested recapping the situation. He asserted that weeks or months ago, my older colleague, who he implied had romantic intentions toward me, invited me on a fully funded romantic trip to the city, which I accepted. He accused me of springing this news on him last minute, distracting him with closeness, food, and romance, and leaving him with the responsibility of the kids to prevent his interference. I protested, denying his accusations. He reminded me of his earlier request not to lie to him or to myself, to which I insisted that I wasn't lying. Bradley interrogated me about the duration of my involvement with Richard. I denied any involvement, but he pressed further, asking about Richard's involvement with me and whether I had been involved with anyone else. He threw in a random question about the capital of California to check my presence of mind. My thoughts raced as I reassured myself that Richard couldn't possibly know anything, as we hadn't been do lovemaking. I believed Bradley had to trust me, being my husband. Bradley persisted, accusing me of being clouded by an affair fog and observing my guilty expression. I denied having an affair, but he suggested that perhaps I wasn't involved with Richard yet, noticing my expression change. I explained that Richard had invited me to the conference 6 weeks prior and assured Bradley that we would have separate accommodations and that I would reimburse Richard for expenses. I emphasized the conference's significance for my career and pleaded with Bradley to trust me, reaffirming my love and loyalty to him. Bradley took a slow sip of his black coffee, emphasizing his preference for unadulterated quality. He accused me of diluting that quality by planning everything behind his back, betraying him with secrets, lies, and deception. He asserted that my actions constituted betrayal, though the extent of it remained uncertain. I took a deep breath, trying to reassure myself that I hadn't done anything wrong yet. Bradley accused me of leaving myself vulnerable and setting myself up for closeness with Richard Taylor, suggesting that my actions indicated anticipation rather than explicit planning. I acknowledged that he wasn't entirely wrong in his assessment. My guilt resurfaced, leaving me speechless. Bradley questioned the purpose of the lingerie I had purchased, pointing out that he had seen the charges on the account. I explained that it was intended for him, for our weekend together, and for when I returned from the trip, though there wasn't much packed for the trip itself. He questioned whether any of the items were specifically for Richard, to which I hesitated before admitting that some might have been. Despite my assurances, Bradley expressed his lack of trust in me and his concerns about the situation. He asserted that my actions gave him plenty of reasons to worry, and he set down his mug, signaling the seriousness of the conversation. He laid out the terms, instructing me to leave the house immediately and go to my mother's place. He emphasized that I was not welcome and needed to have a serious conversation about married women's conduct. I was to stay overnight with Tom and Bernice, as he had already informed them, and they were expecting me. I protested, calling it absurd and claiming he couldn't do that. He countered by stating that what was truly absurd was going on a honeymoon with someone else and expecting him to accept it. He reminded me that we had dealt with similar situations before and warned me that if I didn't learn from this, the marriage would be over. He expressed his seriousness, stating that he was dead serious about his decision. I argued that he couldn't force me as he was my husband, not my boss. He acknowledged that he couldn't control me, but emphasized that if he didn't approve of my actions, he could file for divorce, asserting that it was a matter of partnership within the marriage. Despite my disbelief and protestations, he insisted on ending the marriage, stating that we would sort out the details later and that he would hire a lawyer the next day to serve me with divorce papers. In an attempt to prevent further action, he instructed me to visit my mother and suggested that if I wanted him to refrain from taking legal action, I should comply with his instructions. He reassured me that my mother was expecting me and had been informed about the situation. My phone rang, and he urged me to answer. It was my mom, who warned me about the seriousness of the situation and advised me to comply with Bradley's instructions to avoid regret. She mentioned bacon cookies and hung up, leaving me in shock. My phone buzzed again, and it was my brother, Tommy, who must have sent another message. He expressed concern about my situation, offering the spare room set up as a nursery for me and assuring me that I could stay as long as needed. Tommy emphasized that I should call when on my way, even if it meant waking them up during feedings. I declined Tommy's offer, but he insisted I come over by the next morning, threatening to sever our relationship if I didn't comply. He made it clear that taking sides against Bradley wasn't an option, asserting Bradley's correctness about the family curse. Tommy concluded the conversation by announcing plans to take everyone to IHOP the next day. Left alone, I questioned Bradley about what he had told Tommy and our family. Bradley stood up and explained that he had shared the truth with them, finding their insights helpful. He encouraged me to finish my coffee, pack a bag, and mentioned making a caramel latte for the road. Bradley assured me he would handle the kids, update his family, and postpone informing Chuck and Bethany to avoid an immediate revelation to my father, who would be devastated. Confused and alarmed, I pressed Bradley for details, particularly about Tommy's mention of a family curse. Bradley redirected me to discuss it with Linda, my soon-to-be ex-wife, leaving me puzzled about the unfolding situation. After downing the coffee with extra skim milk and 2 Splendas on my way out, a 16-ounce Yeti cup of double-shot non-fat caramel latte, a stop for gas, and 2 more for bathroom breaks, I pulled into Mom's driveway at 10 minutes past midnight. The garage door opened and I parked in the empty bay. Where was Doug's car? Mom greeted me and expressed happiness at my arrival. She mentioned the importance of me coming and shook her head, suggesting it wouldn't have been good otherwise. Inviting me inside, she informed me about cookies in the kitchen and offered tea. At 60, Mom still looked elegant. She maintained her figure gracefully, though it was showing its age. Her posture was impeccable. Despite having 2 children, she seemed untouched by osteoporosis. Her dark hair was streaked with gray but still lustrous and stylishly arranged, and her eyes were as blue as ever. Like mine. I hoped to look half as good at her age. She began pouring tea without any request from me. I mentioned my preference for no caffeine, explaining that Bradley had made me drink both coffee and a double shot, leaving me jittery. She assured me that the tea she was serving was chamomile, and reassured me that I would be fine, giving me a once-over. She mentioned that I had worn the same dress when talking to Bradley earlier that night. I explained that Bradley didn't allow me to change before kicking me out. I had to grab some stuff and leave. Tommy seemed distressed, repeating, "Oh my," and when I questioned what was wrong with the dress, they mentioned its significance and Tommy's reference to a curse. Confused and desperate for information, I asked about Tommy's comment and the ongoing situation. In response, she handed me homemade ginger snaps and suggested we move to the sitting room for an explanation. There, I noticed the TV showing a paused football game, surprising me because my mom typically avoided football. I inquired about Doug's whereabouts, and she revealed that Doug usually stayed with his friend Brian, with whom he had been in a relationship for almost 20 years. The revelation about Doug's handsomeness left me puzzled about why my mom was married to him. She detailed a complicated story about their marriage with Doug, emphasizing the societal pressures that led them to be married. They acknowledged the acceptance of gay couples marrying nowadays, but explained that, at their age, there were various complexities and layers to their situation. Doug, despite admitting he was gay, did not fully accept himself as such, and did not see himself living openly as a gay man. Instead, he considered his relationship with Brian unique. She clarified that Doug didn't feel shame about being gay. It just wasn't how he identified himself. They referred to their situation as being a beard, an old-fashioned term where gay men and lesbians would marry to meet societal expectations but maintain private lives outside the marriage. When asked about their own involvement, she denied being gay but admitted to being a terrible wife. They confessed to ruining their previous marriages due to various negative traits, especially hurting their father deeply. Tears welled up as they expressed their enduring love for their father and admitted noticing the love between me and Bradley, urging me not to become like them. Overwhelmed with emotion, she broke down crying. In response to my confusion, they briefly rose from their seat, gesturing for me to stay put, mentioning they needed to fetch something to show me. While she was away, I heard her rummaging in one of the spare bedrooms. Glancing at the screen, I noticed it wasn't displaying the game, but was paused on 2 middle-aged male commentators. They might have been football players in their prime before age caught up with them. Mom returned with a blue dress in a clear plastic dry cleaning cover. She noted that the dress they were showing me wasn't exactly the same as the one they wore. While the style differed, The skirt's length and color were nearly identical. They shared that they had worn this dress the night they ended their marriage to my father, almost 30 years ago. The reason for keeping the dress remained unclear to them, whether as a reminder of mistakes, a connection to their time with Jim, or because it made them feel beautiful. They recounted wearing the dress once more on their birthday that year, but it only made things worse. The incident happened in February, during a snowed-in period with little sunlight. They had bought the dress for Valentine's Day, but the plans were canceled, and they ended up spending it with me and someone else. Jim never saw the dress, and to add to the unfortunate circumstances, it was a leap year, extending the duration of the dreaded month. At the time, I was part of a group of women and their husbands. I barely remember their names now. As couples, we were all pleasant, but when it was just us women, well, you wouldn't believe the scheming and gossip. We'd talk about what we'd do if the right man came along. One woman regularly cheated on her husband and boasted about it. Another was planning an affair with a coworker, and we all supported her. Fortunately, her husband caught on before it went too far. I never engaged in any of that until one day I did. There was a local sports star who frequented bars and clubs, targeting married women and humiliating their husbands. He seemed to enjoy the power he had over them. He'd take these women to his hotel and give them an unforgettable experience, aiming to ruin them for other men. He was charming, wealthy, and famous, so he got away with it repeatedly. His activities were something of an open secret among women seeking excitement. I don't know how many marriages he destroyed, but it was more than a few. It was like a game to him. One of those venues was a dinner dance hall affiliated with the hotel. Our group of cheaters and aspirants decided to bring our husbands there on February 29th, Leap Night, to reconnect with each other and our spouses. You and Tommy were staying overnight with the porters, and we all had hotel rooms. What our husbands didn't realize was that attending with them was akin to buying raffle tickets. Mark Lavalier would select one fortunate lady for the evening, making her his chosen companion. That's why the night out excited us girls so much. My attention turned to the screen where Mark Lavalier, the commentator on the left, appeared. His name was displayed in a graphic beneath his chest, confirming his identity. As the revelation unfolded, it became apparent that Mark Lavalier was Mommy's awful boyfriend. The disclosure shattered my reality, leaving me feeling instantly dizzy and unwell. When questioned about it, I couldn't recall much, only vague memories of staying with Nana and Grandpa while Dad was gone for a while when I was 6 years old. The details were hazy, but I vaguely remembered being upset during that time. My parents had tried to shield me from the situation, acknowledging that I might not recall any of it. During that period, Dad had disappeared for weeks, and counseling was sought as a way to address the issues in their marriage. Mom admitted to attempting to manipulate or control Dad, as he had accused her of doing. The counseling turned into a disaster, and Dad left for Atlanta in a fit of anger for 10 days. Mom didn't know where he had gone until later, when he started taking temporary work assignments out of town. The mistreatment from Mom led to Dad's anger and departure from their marriage. Mom further revealed an incident with Mark approaching their table, taking her for a dance without permission. They danced for several songs, and Mark instructed Mom to slip out the back with him. When returning to the table for her purse, Mom faced Jim, who had witnessed the entire encounter. Jim covered for her, distracting Dad and allowing Mom to leave. This marked the end of her marriage to Dad. The separation and divorce took another 1.5 years, marking the real conclusion of Mom's marriage. Reflecting on that time, Mom expressed sorrow, acknowledging that the experience was beyond dreadful. However, she asserted that the worst part wasn't the separation itself, but rather the reasons behind it. Mom confessed that she would have sabotaged her marriage eventually, even if Mark, the scoundrel, hadn't chosen her that night. She highlighted her repeated destructive behavior with 3 different husbands, admitting her self-centered and entitled mindset, which she believed mirrored my current behavior. Mom emphasized that recognizing such behavior wasn't apparent at the time, and insisted that only a different perspective would reveal it. This conversation, she explained, was a kind of intervention, hoping that sharing her story would provide me with insight to change my ways before it's too late. She then shared her thoughts during her marriage with Jim, describing it as solid and deeply committed. Despite Jim being a wonderful and devoted husband, she succumbed to the temptation of a rare opportunity with Marc Lavalier, who promised to transform her into a glamorous, liberated goddess for a single night of enchanting closeness. After that night, Mom expected to return to her loving husband, believing that Jim's love would eventually overcome any initial hurt. She detailed waking up in her mother's recliner, having fainted due to the overwhelming situation. Mom handed me water and cookies, explaining that I had been unconscious for about 30 minutes. She suggested I wouldn't sleep given the circumstances and encouraged me to stay and continue the conversation. I expressed my intention to go to bed, but Mom doubted I would sleep, given the resonance of her story with my thoughts. I reluctantly agreed that her story had indeed resonated with me. As I sat with the clear bag containing her blue dress next to me, Mom expressed concern about the possibility of me following in her footsteps. She questioned whether I was destined to ruin every marriage I entered, contemplating if I took my husband for granted while seeking solace in other men. Despite not having strayed yet, she acknowledged my intention to do so. She urged me to listen to my inner voice and expressed concern about the potential doom of my marriage if I continued down this path. When she inquired about my inner turmoil, she considered it a good sign that I was conflicted, but sighed in acknowledgement of the struggle. Mom acknowledged her own skill in silencing the voice of reason, admitting the difficulty of diagnosing and treating herself as a psychologist. She understood the rationalizations I had made, convincing myself that entertaining another man was acceptable, emphasizing the exhilaration and validation it provided. She cautioned against the dangerous thinking that Bradley's forgiveness would pardon or accommodate such transgressions, likening it to a medication that could lead to self-destruction. She highlighted the broader impact on Bradley, Braylon, Caden, Tommy, herself, and even my father, expressing deep concern about 3 generations of Johnson women following the same pattern of self-destruction. The thought of devastating my father by witnessing this cycle weighed heavily on her. As Mom delved into family history, she clarified that Nana, being a Reed, did not have any known instances of infidelity. However, she pointed to Gamma Carroll, who cheated on James, Jim's father, while he was sick and dying. Having a boyfriend named Ralph, Carroll eventually married him after James passed, but the marriage didn't last due to mutual unfaithfulness. Bob entered the picture later through a cancer family support group, and Jim initially distanced himself from his mother, holding her responsible for James's pass away. Mom explained that I might not have known this family history because I and Dad were already divorced when they started visiting Gamma Carroll and Bob in Colorado. Dad forgave Carroll eventually, bridging the divide between them, and he even became friends with Bob. Despite Bob not being at fault, Dad forgave his mother but struggled to forgive Mom. However, he eventually forgave her at my wedding after 20 years, even though she felt she didn't deserve it. She had been unrepentant, apologizing mainly for the cost it imposed on their relationship and attributing his hurt feelings to his fault. She admitted to being proud of the affair, emphasizing that her pride was the whole point. Mom expressed her fear of being single, noting that she had never experienced it and wouldn't know how to exist alone. Contrasting this with Dad, who had the wisdom to give himself time before getting seriously involved with someone else, she admitted her lack of understanding about his approach. She acknowledged giving Mark her number the first night they met, leading to subsequent calls and messages. Despite not planning it, she found herself caught up in another one of Mark's pickup spots, contributing to the cycle of relationships without sufficient self-reflection. 2 weeks later, on St. Patrick's Day at an Irish pub, Mom recounted her shameful behavior when her marriage with Dad was hanging in the balance. She continued to see Mark quietly, even while attempting to patch things up with Dad. Mom thought her interactions with Mark had nothing to do with her relationship with Jim, believing that what he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. Reflecting on her actions, she considered herself stupid and foolish. In an attempt to deceive Dad, Mom pretended to break up with Mark by staging a phone call, playing the recording for Dad. However, Mark persisted until he was certain the divorce was finalized, then moved on to another conquest, a married woman named Maureen. By that time, Mom had already arranged to marry Jeff. Mom emphasized the need to grasp the entire narrative, as it wasn't solely about Dad and Mark, but extended further to her marriage with Jeff. Despite Jeff being a decent guy, Mom acknowledged he wasn't Jim. She married Jeff because he was available, and while she might have made it work with effort, she chose not to. Devoted to raising me and Tommy in the family home, Mom saw herself as only a part-time spouse. She had decided that if Jeff truly loved her, he would accept her choices, emphasizing that he had no other choice because he was a good guy. Mom believed that if he cared about being a good husband, he would comply with her decisions. For her, the external factors in her life weren't supposed to impact their relationship, and Jeff simply had to cope with it. Mom claimed it didn't imply she loved him any less, and wasn't truly depriving him of anything. She urged her mom to understand and mentioned feeling dizzy and sick, but insisted she wasn't done. Following Jeff, Mom entered a relationship with Danny, seeking a more open-ended dynamic since she knew she would spend time away from the marriage. Danny was open to having other partners, essentially cheating on Mom, and she turned a blind eye to it, considering it her penance. Though she didn't precisely love him, Mom married Danny, and their arrangement persisted for a while. As time passed and her children grew older, Mom felt neglected and intentionally sought attention elsewhere. She reasoned that if an open marriage was acceptable for Danny, then it should be acceptable for her. Feeling she wasn't impacting Danny, Mom believed he would afford her the same leniency she had given him for the past 6 or 7 years. However, she misjudged the situation. As the end approached, Mom initiated things with Glenn. Mom insisted on sharing these details to make her daughter see the recurring pattern in her relationships. Describing Glenn as the best of her husband since Dad, Mom acknowledged that she took him for granted, assuming he would forgive her regardless of her actions. The most significant argument occurred after Emma's wedding, where Mom essentially ignored Glenn while focusing on reconciling with Dad for closure. Jim had to point out that Mom wasn't tending to her husband, treating Glenn with the same disregard she had shown to Dad, Jeff, and Danny. Mom openly wept as she shared this part of her story. I could only gaze at my mother, absorbing the emotional weight of the revelation. My arms trembled as I urgently struggled my way to the bathroom, barely reaching the toilet before emptying my stomach into the bowl. My mom stood by me, holding my hair as I retched. She tried to console me, sharing her own mistakes, regrets, and misguided choices. In her words, she unfolded tales of broken marriages, selfish decisions, and a repeating pattern of seeking temporary solace outside the commitment she had made. She spoke of her own weaknesses, acknowledging her selfish and thoughtless nature. As my mother revealed the narrative of her tangled relationships, I couldn't help but see echoes of my own life, shadows of the choices I was on the brink of making. She spoke of wearing a blue dress, seeking attention, and taking her husband's for granted. It was as if she was painting a cautionary tale, a mirror reflecting my current struggles and the potential consequences of my actions. My head was as churned up as my belly. The weight of her words hit me harder than I expected. She described a cycle of self-destruction, a path I seemed poised to follow. The realization was both unnerving and awakening. In her tearful confessions, my mother admitted marrying Dagnow to spare him from the pain she had inflicted on her previous husbands. I comforted her, trying to offer support amid the emotional storm. Yet, as the stories unfolded, I couldn't escape the confrontation with my own reflection in her words. When she veered into my current situation, warning me of the consequences of my actions and the impact on Bradley, I felt a surge of nausea. The weight of truth, regret, and impending decisions overwhelmed me, and I staggered, collapsing onto the cold bathroom floor. The room spun, not just from the physical sickness, but from the emotional whirlwind that had gripped me. My mother's stories, a tapestry of missteps and heartbreaks, had wrapped around me, leaving me entangled in the consequences of her choices and the potential echoes in my own life. Struggling urgently to reach the bathroom, my arms trembled as I barely made it to the toilet, retching with Mom by my side, holding my hair. She encouraged me to let out all the bad stuff, emphasizing the realization of the consequences of burning down one's own life repeatedly. Mom expressed a strong desire for me not to follow the same path. In the midst of my emotional and physical distress, I questioned my own actions, berating myself for the poor choices I had made. I acknowledged the warnings, particularly from Bradley, and condemned myself for not heeding them. The harsh self-talk included doubts about deserving my husband, love, and the happy home with Braylon and Caden. The fear of following in my mother's footsteps was evident, and I chastised myself for what I perceived as a destructive pattern in relationships. The tirade ended with a bleak prediction of ending up alone after several meaningless marriages in a similar kind of hell. After what felt like 9 years of that, Mom gave me some mouthwash and made me eat 2 more cookies. She said the ginger would settle my stomach. She brushed my hair and let me change my clothes. I didn't even have to go into the bag I'd packed. We're the same size. I could wear any of her clothes. So she gave me some comfy sweats and kids. She bundled me in her car and drove me 2 miles to Tommy and Bernice's house. She's all cried out. Mom informed my brother about my condition as she took care of me, expressing that I now understood the consequences of my actions. She instructed him to put me straight to bed, and she would join them for pancakes whenever I managed to get up and gather myself. Grateful, my brother thanked her and explained that Jonathan and the baby were currently asleep, a precious moment they took advantage of whenever possible. Mom kissed him, expressing love, and mentioned seeing him at a more decent hour. Tom guided me inside and directed me to the nursery room, mentioning they weren't using it yet. Little Lila was peacefully asleep with her mother in the master bedroom, nestled in a crib-like extension beside their bed. Tom assured me that he wouldn't lecture me, acknowledging that our mom had probably done enough of that. He understood that I would spend the night processing everything, hoping I could get some sleep. Before concluding, he felt the need to share something about Bradley, clarifying that he hadn't spoken to him since I left. Despite acknowledging that I knew Bradley better, he wanted to emphasize something he might not have seen in him before. In a brother-to-brother-in-law manner, Tom revealed that Bradley was a fighter. He elaborated on Bradley's background as an Olympic fencer who worked as a combat consultant and choreographer for movies and theater productions, emphasizing Bradley's real understanding of a genuine bout, despite making things appear flashy and spectacular. As he referred to Bradley as a fighter, the weight of the words echoed through my thoughts. My brother painted a vivid picture of Bradley's commitment to me and our family, likening him to a warrior, a Navy SEAL, a force to be reckoned with. Despite Bradley's lack of combat experience, my brother emphasized the unwavering determination and protective instincts he held for us. It was a powerful message, a reassurance that Bradley would go to great lengths to keep us safe and united. The gravity of my brother's warning settled in, a stark reminder that attempting anything like my recent struggles would be futile. Bradley, armed with knowledge and a deep commitment, would not be deceived. My brother's intervention had shed light on Bradley's awareness, and I felt a mix of gratitude and relief. In a surprising revelation, my brother shared that our father had warned Bradley about potential challenges before we got married. It was a preemptive son-in-law talk, offering a unique perspective on marriage and human nature. The conversation highlighted the lengths my family had gone to, preparing for the possibility of me straying down a destructive path. As my brother expressed his willingness to intervene and support me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of security. He kissed my forehead, offering a brotherly protection that brought comfort and reassurance. That night, I slept soundly, the weight of the revelations and the emotional turmoil of the past days beginning to lift. The next morning, the familiar chaos of family life greeted me, a mix of energetic children, misplaced shoes, and unbrushed teeth. It felt different in this new setting, but there was a hint of nostalgia for the earlier, more hectic days of parenting. As we gathered for breakfast, I couldn't help but admire my brother's family. Bernice, his wife, embodied grace and beauty, effortlessly balancing motherhood with her gymnast's physique and delicate Belgian accent. My brother's protective instincts extended to her, ensuring a haven of security for their family. The pancakes served that morning were not just a breakfast. They carried the flavor of emotional release and the optimism for better days. The conversation navigated away from past troubles, allowing us to share moments of joy and connection. Later, as Mom drove my car to meet us, the mention of a little something in the back caught my attention. She revealed it was her blue dress, a symbolic gesture of letting go. Despite its outdated style, she believed in its comeback, a hopeful reminder that even after facing the shadows of the past, there could be a resurgence of brighter days. "I suppose we could classify it as vintage," Mom said with a slight half-shrug. "You're an adult, a beautiful one. You'll make your own decisions. Do what you want with it. Just please, try not to repeat my mistakes. Don't use it to break your husband's heart. And for heaven's sake, never let your father catch you wearing it. It would surely give him a heart attack. I won't, Mom. Thank you. Have a safe journey home. I love you. Love you too. Thank you. Thanks for everything. Before starting the car, I sent 2 messages. In the first message to Richard, I canceled my trip to Chicago, instructing him to cancel the plane tickets, the booked room, and the conference registration, seeking a refund for the fee. I suggested finding someone else for his plans and expressed anger for threatening my marriage and family, almost ruining my life. I demanded no further communication except in a professional context, which should be kept to a minimum. I warned him to avoid my husband and brother for his own safety, as they were aware of everything. In the second message to Bradley, I apologized for the situation and regretted causing worry. I acknowledged acting without considering him and promised never to contemplate such actions again. I pledged never to take him for granted, to never underestimate him, and always prioritize him. I thanked him for intervening and vowed to be the one to stop myself from now on. Understanding the family history, I expressed deep love for him and recognized that he deserved better than the neglect, disrespect, and foolishness I had shown. I solemnly promised never to repeat such behavior. As I embarked on the journey home, a realization struck me about what to do with Mom's blue dress. I decided to destroy the garment.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I am Michael Warren, 40 years old, a financial planner, and today I would have been single again. My late soon-to-be former wife had shown that I couldn't trust her or believe her, so I divorced her. It would have been final today. Leah McCall was a junior transfer from a community college. She was in my business ethics class. I was a senior needing 2 classes to get my degree. I was taking this class as part of my major, and because I liked the way the professor gave his lectures. She sat down next to me during the first lecture of the class. I looked over at her and liked what I saw. She appeared to be petite, had a wonderful smile, and the prettiest blue eyes I had seen since my younger sister died. I was 24 and had taken a couple of years between high school and college to help my family to pay some of the medical bills for my younger sister, Emma. The bills were for treatment for her injuries caused by the rich drugged-up a-hole who managed to kill himself when he ran the red light and T-boned Emma's compact car. Mom and Dad eventually got a sizable award from the idiot's estate after Emma died, but it was hard times until the lawsuits were settled. Because of Emma's age and the a-hole's drugged state at the time of the accident, my folks received a more than $12 million, tax-free, settlement. Leah was talkative and told me she was 21, and that she had won the birthday lottery and had not yet turned 5 when she started school. Once the professor started the class, she quieted down and listened and took a lot of notes. After the lecture was finished, and we were exiting the classroom, she asked me why I didn't take notes. I said, I have a secret weapon. I pulled my pocket recorder out. I continued. I record every lecture and always sit in the front row so I don't miss anything. I asked if she would join me for a cup of coffee. She said sure. As we walked to the coffee shop just off campus, I told her about my family and she told me about hers. She had a younger sister who was a senior in high school and Mom. Dad decided to leave for greener pastures when Elizabeth, her sister, turned 16. That did not work out so well for him. The greener pastures husband killed him and her just 2 months after he left. We had our coffee and another. We ended talking for almost 2 hours. I asked for her and she agreed to go on a date. We decided to go to a dance club that was near the campus. Leah was living in the dorms, and I had an apartment just off campus. I told her if she did not want to walk, I would pick her up at 7 o'clock and take her to dinner. She said that dinner sounded good, but that I was not to go overboard because she understood that college kids did not normally roll in money. I laughed and told her my major was all about money management, and I would be prudent. I did not tell her that my parents gave me back all the money I had spent on my sister, and they paid for all of my college expenses, so I was not a struggling college student. We went to a local upscale Italian restaurant. I had calamari and Leah had veal scallopini. We had Chianti, of course, and unlike most Italian places, this wine did not taste like red varnish. The dinner was a smash, and Leah had a tiramisu and I had gelato for dessert. It was a wonderful evening. When we finished dinner and danced ourselves out, I took her back to the dorm and we kissed. Then she said, "We did not have to come right back here." I replied, "Maybe not, however. I want to take you out again, and I plan on a long, slow courtship. I want to see where we may end up." This was a wonderful beginning, It turned out to be a wonderful courtship while it lasted. We dated for the entire school year. That summer after I graduated, I found a job with a local insurance agency, and Leah went back home for the summer. Sometime during the summer, my calls were not being returned. I was not raised a dummy and realized that Leah had moved on. I was sad and put out that she did not tell me, but went on with my life. The insurance thing did not work out, but after 6 months, when I showed a disposition for investments, I moved to a financial planning and brokerage house that was affiliated with the company. I got a raise and a bigger commission. For someone under 30, I was doing great. I had been with the company for about 18 months when Leah called me. The first thing she asked was, "Why did you stop calling me that summer?" To which I heatedly responded, "After you failed to return my calls for the 3rd week in a row, I got the message. Now did that romance end so you could come slumming again?" I got a flash on my phone. Call ended 47 seconds. That did not end it. She was at my office the next morning. I walked past her and opened my door and stepped aside so she could come in. I closed the door behind her. "I would offer you something to drink, but my common courtesy left when I was hung up on last evening. What can I do for you, Miss McCall, or is it Mrs. Now?" She was irate. "You can stop being a horse's butt. I know I made a big mistake, but I came to apologize, and I haven't been able to because you are so mad at me." "I'm not mad at you. I got over that 2 weeks after you failed to tell me we were through, and even before you didn't return my 3rd missed call that summer. If I treated you as bad as you treated me, I apologize. Now that that is out of the way, why are you here?" "I told you I came to apologize, and it isn't Mrs., it is still Miss McCall. I made a terrible mistake that summer, and I am sorry I was too chicken to tell you I was dating other guys. That is ancient history. I have gotten over it and moved on with my life. I accept your apology. Have a nice day." With that, I got up and held open the door. Leah stood up, walked over, and took the door out of my hand and closed it again. She screamed, "You sanctimonious prick. Didn't you ever make a mistake in a relationship?" I angrily came back with, "Of course I have, but I always let the person know I was moving on. I can't say that I was surprised that you moved on, but I was and am put out that you did not have the courtesy to tell me that. Now this conversation is becoming circular. If you are done apologizing, this is my place of business and I have paper to shuffle. Please show yourself out." It was a good thing she had closed the door, because the swearing and vitriol that came out her mouth was epic. This was from a woman that never even said damn when we were dating. As she wound down, I called security and had her escorted out. I shuffled paper for the rest of the unproductive day. I finally left a couple of hours early and stopped at a local pub for a beer. While sitting at the bar, I realized that I still had feelings for Leah McCall and that I was probably piling on this morning. After I finished my beer, I went home and called the number that she had called from. The call informed me that the number was unavailable. I assumed that Leah had turned her phone off. I figured that the actions from today were enough to put me off all woman for maybe a week. Off Leah, probably forever. Well, good intentions and all that. Leah wrote me a letter and addressed it to my office. "Michael, it seems I have spent the last few years realizing I made a mistake and the last few days apologizing for those mistakes. What I did and said in your office was unfair, spiteful, and after going over it in my head, disgusting. This letter is an attempt to tell you what I have been trying to say verbally, but without the embarrassment and the anger that I spouted in person. I made several mistakes that summer when I did not return your calls. First, of course, was not telling you. Second was serial dating a-holes that summer and during the next school year. Yes, there was more than one. There was even more than 5. Not one of them was you. Not one of them was even worthy of wiping the dirt off your shoes. I understand now why I did it, but at the time it was just because you were not there. Not one of them even got a glimpse at my underwear. I was afraid of my feelings for you. If you had asked me to marry you before I went home that summer, I would have said yes. When you were not there, I felt the emptiness, and that's when the fear came. I started dating some of my old high school classmates. When you stopped calling, I knew that I had destroyed the thing I wanted most. I started to unconsciously look for a-holes, and did I ever find them? One guy was married. His wife gave me a broken tooth and a fat lip before she destroyed his penis and testicles with several well-placed kicks. Another guy wanted to have me accompany him to a swingers party. He lasted 2 dates. Once school started back up, I was invited by one guy to a frat dog show. Naive me thought that we would see some cute animals. The animals were there all right. They were the frat brothers. The dog show was a frat contest to see who could bring the ugliest girl to the party. I escorted all of the girls out of there once I found out the truth. There were others, but either they or I had so much baggage that they didn't work out. Those 3 were the worst. Anyway, shortly after the frat party, I sought out professional help. I found a good therapist, and she led me to discover the fear of my feelings that I had for you and that I was running away from those feelings. She showed me that my not returning your calls was because of my fears and not because I was no longer interested. I realized that my actions in your office were out of line, and I apologize for that. It seems that all I am doing is apologizing to you. I would like a chance to start over again. Please call me if we can do that. Leah. I read that letter and sat on it for a couple of days. I was still upset with her outburst and wanted to let my feelings settle down a little before I responded. There was no question in my mind I was going to respond, but it was how I was going to respond that I needed to think about. Miss McCall, I accepted your apologies. I even told you so. Perhaps you even remember that I told you so. Now if I were writing this to my sweet Leah, it would go like this. I have strong feelings for you, dear, but I was and still am hurt by your past actions. I know I accepted the apology, but the hurt is still there. I was indeed thinking of marriage when you decided to drop me. Now, even if we get back together, I will not ask. I have lost a lot of my trust in you. I would like to go out with you again, but it would have to be strictly non-exclusive. I have to be able to not worry if you are dating someone else when you aren't with me. If we are not exclusive, I don't have to care if you're with someone else. You have to decide if you can live with that. If you think you could abide with that, you can call and let me know. Or, you could just do what you wish and not tell me like last time. Either way, I really am over the mad, just not the hurt. As I said before, I was a few weeks away from asking you to marry me. Michael. I read it and decided that there was enough anger in there to let her know what I was thinking without shutting all of the doors on my end. I thought that if she called or came to see me, we had a chance. I mailed the letter. Well, the result of the letter was not what I expected. I expected one of two actions, with three possible results. I mostly expected Leah to just kiss me off in her mind and ignore me and go on with her life. If that didn't happen, I expected her to call, write, or show up in person. If she showed up, she would be either contrite or angry. None of that happened. What happened was she started stalking me. She tried to be invisible, but she hadn't thought it out too well. At the time, I was living in the country on a farm I bought with the intention of raising horses. The road I lived on was over 7 miles of 2-lane gravel, and a major traffic rush was 4 cars a day. A car following me for a week straight was noticeable, especially when the car is a lime green Volkswagen New Beetle. I decided 2 could play those games, and I started following her as she was trying to find me. She did not catch on as I had purchased 2 vehicles and switched them daily. I normally only drove my sedan when I wasn't doing farm work. I drove the pickup when I needed to go get supplies. About a week into not finding me, she finally called. Michael, where have you been this past week? I could not find your car at your office. I know you figured out I was following you, but it was only because I was trying to work up the courage to tell you I want us together again. If it has to be on your terms, then that is what it will have to be. I thought of a perfect solution, and I thought a damn funny one. Okay, but on my terms, but the first non-return call, and we are done for good. I realize that there are times when you won't be able to answer your phone, but I will always leave a call back number and message, even if it's to just say I called. Now would you like to go to dinner this Friday? Of course, where and how dressy? I was thinking of maybe going to that old monastery that has been converted into a fancy gourmet restaurant. If you say okay, it is a dress for the woman and a suit and tie for the man. Still want to go? Yes, she squealed. I have just the dress to wear. I have wanted to wear it for you ever since I found you again. What time? I will make reservations for 7 o'clock, and we'll be at your place at 6:15, unless you would like to see the farm you have driven past. It is mine and I live there. I don't think I want to see it on our first date back together. Maybe Saturday? Sounds like a plan. See you then. What I didn't tell her was I would pick her up in my farm truck. I would not drive that to the restaurant, but would park my BMW Series 7 sedan at my office, and we would switch vehicles there. That is why I told her 45 minutes early for a 10-minute drive. I expected a semi-playful slug on the arm when I drove up to my sedan, but I did not know what her reaction would be to the truck. When I pulled up to her house, she took a look at the truck, at me, at the truck, at me, and got a crestfallen look on her face. I deliberately did not wash the truck on the outside, but I was not so cruel as to leave the inside a mess that might hurt her dress. What she did not know was my 1950 F1 Ford was a hot rod. The inside was better than any car on the market, and the bucket seats just about massaged your back when you sat in them. The engine was a Ford 289 with twin 4-barrel carbs, mated to a Muncie 4-speed transmission. I opened the door for her and helped her in, taking care to protect her dress from the dirt. When we got to my office and she saw my Beamer, she did slug me. She also said that the truck was much nicer than it looked. The dinner was superb. We talked, and I found out she was working for a large property management firm and was in charge of a large complex that just started renting units in town. Just like our first date, I took her home after the planned stuff was finished. We kissed, and she invited me in. I declined, citing the fact that we were not that far back in our relationship yet. Then I asked what time she wanted me to pick her up for the farm tour. I'll drive out. I know where it is. Then she laughed and asked, how long did it take you to figure out I was following you? 2 days. Cars like yours are rare, but one time would not raise my eyebrow. The second time I knew it was you. After that week, I started to follow you. I switched the Beamer and the pickup every day. With that, I left and went home. Well, the next morning, my pickup came driving down the road as I was feeding the horses. That scamp, she must have picked my pocket for the keys. The truck was washed and waxed and looked as good as when it came out of the paint booth. Leah jumped down from the driver's seat with a big laugh. Man, you know how to build a truck. That thing is too good to be a farm truck. After she settled down, Leah went back to the truck and got a small suitcase out of the truck. I brought some grubbies to walk in the fields and to mess with the horses. Where can I change after the tour of your mansion? I showed her the house, and after she changed into her grubbies, we went to tour the farm. She was impressed with the machine shed, as I had a '34 Ford sedan on blocks awaiting work. We went from there to the horse barn. The horses, being curious and friendly, came into their feed stalls and waited for treats and pets. Out from under the feed rack scampered my resident troublemaker and professional Mauser Catalpa, my big black barn cat. Leah got sniffs, then the leg rubbing that indicated that she was approved of. I commented that she seemed very comfortable with the animals. I always wanted to live on a farm and enjoy clean air and beautiful animals. She replied. Just then my gentle giants, Ethan and Brooke, my Belgian draft horses, came into the barn. Leah's eyes got the size of golf balls. She jumped about a foot when Ethan whinnied that he wanted attention too. I went over to the feed storage area and grabbed a handful of carrots. I asked Leah if she wanted to give Ethan one. She just about wet her pants with excitement. Ethan took the carrot and snorted, shook his head, and came back for more. Brooke gave a snort as if to say, "Where is mine?" After we treated all of the horses, we went out and got on a UTV, and I drove Leah all over my section and a half of pastures. I had all of it in clover and alfalfa. A neighbor was leasing it, and I was to get enough hay for my horses to feed for a year. 8 horses eat a lot of hay. After the day at the farm, Leah never turned down a date without explaining why, and they were mostly family or work obligations. It looked like we were exclusive even without saying we were. We dated about 8 months, and Leah asked me to marry her. I know you said you would not ask me, so I am asking you. Michael Warren, the love of my life, will you marry me? Of course, sweetie. I have loved you even when I was mad or hurt. I never stopped loving you. I needed you to decide that this was what you wanted. I will marry you tomorrow if that is what you want. The wedding planning was interrupted when my folks both died from carbon monoxide poisoning, when the furnace at their house developed a serious chimney pipe crack. The furnace room was on the opposite side of their bedroom wall, and the gases leaked under the plasterboard. It was a serious shock. First my sister, then my parents. After the funerals, I went silent for a few weeks. Leah was right there for me through it all. She even was there at the coroner's inquest where it was determined that it was an accident caused by an avoidable failure of the chimney pipe. About 2 months after that, as I was coming out of my funk, my parents' lawyer called about the wills. He stated that only I could be there as I was still unmarried. It turns out that after all of the charities were taken care of, and a memorial scholarship was set up in Emma's name at the local high school, I received the rest of the estate in the form of a trust fund that would pay me a generous stipend for the rest of my life. The trust also bought my farm, my vehicles, and any other real property that I might purchase in the future. The lawyer explained that it was in my best interest to do it that way. He pointed out that the trust could not be attached by the local and state courts in a lawsuit or a divorce. I went with his advice and ended up with almost $1 million cash for the farm and my cars and truck. I also received the deed for the house my parents owned. I had the house repaired, a new furnace and chimney put in, and rented the place out to a young couple. I made sure they knew what had happened so that they would not be shocked by gossipy neighbors. The wedding plans resumed after about 4 months. We decided on a small family-only ceremony. It was a somewhat rushed affair, as Leah got more and more anxious to be married. It was still a wonderful day. We decided to honeymoon in Florida. We spent a week in Tampa and a week in the Keys. Leah tried and fell in love with golf. She loved the Gulf Coast, and I bought a condo right on the bay. It was our getaway place. For 2 people in their late 20s and early 30s, we had it made financially. We tried for a couple of years to have kids, and when it wasn't happening, we had ourselves checked out. It turns out Leah was sterile. She was having periods, but the eggs were not viable. She really was not at all put out by that. She admitted that the findings took a lot of pressure off and allowed our lovemaking to be about love, not making children. We lived on the farm for 6 years until Leah got a job promotion offer in Tampa. It was a substantial move up in her career. She would be in charge of a 1,200-unit apartment condo complex as the unit manager. I rented the farm out to the oldest son of the neighbor who leases the farmland. George, the son, had been helping me with the horses all along and had just gotten married when Leah got the job offer. It solved that problem and set my mind at ease about the welfare of my horses. We moved to our condo, and I opened a small office for financial planning. I had received my certification and had pursued an MBA online. I was awarded that a year before the move. My business had very normal hours, and clients came to me. I was the darling of the blue hair set, as there were and are a large portion of the population over 50 in the area. I was prudent, but produced very good returns for my clients. Leah's job, on the other hand, often had emergency hours, at least according to Leah. Her company did a poor job of checking references and got a lot of college-age rich kids looking to party. For the first 18 months, until she could refuse to renew leases on the worst of the partiers, she was at the complex most Friday and Saturday nights and a lot of Sunday mornings. Once those problems were resolved, her hours became much more normal. That is up until about 4 months ago. She was starting to get calls to go to the complex a couple of nights a week. At the same time, she started to become indifferent at home. Not mean, not angry, but certainly not loving and open. Then last week, she informed me that the corporation officers were going to come to town to have a company dinner for the complex's staff. She told me it was employees only, and she would be home by 11 o'clock. I, being the clueless man, did not think anything of it. One of my major clients called and wanted to take us to dinner as a reward for the great returns his portfolio had the past year. I explained that I would love to go, but my wife had a corporate function to go to that same night. We made plans to go to the local beachfront DoubleTree, as they had an excellent restaurant on site. When we walked in and were seated, I looked up from the menu and Leah walked in with one of her staff. He was a member of the maintenance staff and in charge of maintenance of all of the condo maintenance. He was also 5 years younger than Leah. She had not seen me, as when they were being seated, she sat next to James instead of across from him. I watched them, and as no one else showed up, and Leah was not wearing the same clothes she wore out to go to the corporate dinner, I knew then that my marriage was over. I decided to end the charade, so I begged off from my client and went over to their table. Leah started to tear up. James looked defiant. It's good to see that all of the corporate bigwigs are at this dinner, Leah. Please do not make excuses or apologies. Just move your stuff out tomorrow. I will see the lawyers in the morning. Then I looked at James. Don't you dare smirk at me. You are going to be named in the divorce papers, and your pregnant wife will have your nuts in a sack for you to carry for the rest of your life. You want some of me a hole? Get up and follow me out. With that, I turned around and walked out. Leah called after me, but I kept on going. The next morning when I called the lawyers, I got the information I expected. The lawyers told me that as Florida is a no-fault divorce state, the normal asset split is 50-50 except when adultery is presumed and listed. I told them that I did not care about the split as the only assets were my business and would sell that and give her half. I told them to file. Leah quit her job and made it extremely hard to serve the papers as she was never in one place at the same time. Leah, of course, moved out and retained her own lawyer, and we were able to serve him, so she finally had to answer the petition for divorce. She decided to fight it. I changed the reason to adultery and presented a 75-25 in my favor split of assets without my business. I did put in the settlement offer she could have the condo, as I had never put that in the trust's assets. I planned on moving back to the farm. There was no counteroffer, just a demand for counseling and a face-to-face meeting. I told my lawyers to tell her lawyers that we would see them in court. While we were waiting for the court date, I was approached by a major corporate firm in the city wanting to buy my business. I sold it for $100 and a large block of non-voting preferred stock. They were flabbergasted until I explained about the pending divorce. I also accepted a temporary position as transition manager to assist my customers to move to the new owners or assist them in finding a new manager for their funds. We finally got a court date, and Leah's lawyer got a continuance. The next date, the same thing. I finally told my lawyers to withdraw the petition. I then told my lawyers that they were to inform her lawyers that I was leaving the area in 30 days, so they needed to either be in court before then, or it would become moot when I was out of their jurisdiction. We got a court date. They wanted counseling. I said no. The judge said yes. I spent 15 days in jail for contempt of court. We went before the judge again. This time I offered her everything except the stock. We had almost $250,000 in savings, some other stocks, and the condo. All in all, if she agreed, she would be worth almost $1 million. They wanted counseling. 15 days later, I offered nothing except the condo. They wanted counseling. This time the judge got mad at both sides and the lawyers went to jail for 10 days. The next date, they only asked for the last offer and a 1.5-hour meeting between Leah and I. I talked to my lawyers and told them to counter with a signature on the papers, then both sides' lawyers present at the meeting. They agreed. The meeting was set up for a weekday morning. I walked into the meeting with my legal team. Leah was already there with her lawyer. I opened things up. Until I have the signed divorce papers, this meeting is not starting, and if they are not produced in the next 60 seconds, I am leaving and I will be out of the area by dark. Here are the ownership papers for the condo. I am relinquishing claim to it as soon as the completed papers are in my hand. With that, I took a lighter out of my pocket and ignited it and held up the condo deed. The papers appeared and Leah signed them. I started in again. I know your side wanted this meeting, Leah, but I am going to open it. I only have one question. Why did you throw away our marriage to have sex with someone else? Leah recoiled as if she had been slapped. Then she started to sob. I sat down and waited, but I put a cheap kitchen timer on the table after I set it to 30 minutes. I did not say anything, but everyone could hear the ticking. After she got herself under control, and as the timer approached 25 minutes, she said, I did it because I was excited by the illicit and wrong-feeling nature of James. He was not the only one, just the one you caught me with again. When I started to do this, I seemed to pick a-holes. James was gone after that night, and his wife has no idea where to send the divorce papers. I still loved you. No, I still love you. But I realize that I have hurt you way too much for you to forgive me this time. She continued, there were no emergency problems. I laughed when you believed that as I screwed almost half the men in the complex. I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it because I could. When I was doing it, you were not even in my mind. I don't want the condo, but I will take it and sell it for enough money to go away. I won't go back to the farm or to my family. I will find a therapist wherever I land and find out why I have to hurt you and do these self-destructive things. She sighed. You got your divorce and I am now out of your life. I took my copies of the papers, and the messenger that was waiting took the court copies. I slid the condo deed over, and my lawyers and I left. The messenger delivered the papers to my new mobile home on a far corner of the farm. I did not have the desire or the heart to move the renters out. I even offered to sell them the house and a couple of acres if they wanted it. They informed me they would be moving out to his father's farm next year and wanted to continue with the lease agreement for the forage crops. I agreed. I opened the papers, and there was a notice from the Tampa newspaper dated 3 days ago. A local businesswoman and a local man shot and killed. The article went on to say that Leah Warren, 36, and Mark Calloway, 32, were shot and killed last night. The alleged shooter, the wife of Mark Calloway, was arrested at the scene. They were at the condo owned by Ms. Warren, a divorcee and manager of an apartment and condo complex in St. Petersburg. Well, I never wanted it to end like that. But Leah found the ultimate a-hole, and it cost her. Life is a journey, and not always a long one. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.